Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. The clicking started when I was halfway down the trail, just past the last house where the gravel road turned into dirt. It was late, maybe around 10:30. I'd gotten home from work restless, the kind where sitting still makes your skin feel tight. The weather was warm for early fall, clear sky, no wind. I figured a short walk wouldn't hurt. I'd done it 100 times. Same loop through the trees, out by the old utility easement, then back toward the neighborhood. The first click sounded like someone snapping their tongue once. I stopped walking without really thinking about it, head tilted. Everything else was normal. Crickets, distant traffic, my own breathing. No more clicking. I shrugged it off and kept going. A few steps later, it came back. Soft, quick, not loud. Click, click, click. It didn't sound close enough to be right next to me, but it also didn't feel far away. It was like it existed somewhere just outside where I could point to. I stopped again. Silence. I actually laughed, a short, nervous one, and said out loud, "Okay." Like that explained it. I told myself it was an insect, or something echoing weird through the trees. Sound does strange things at night, I knew that. I walked again, slower this time. The clicking resumed almost immediately, but now it felt like it was moving. Not following behind me exactly, more like it was shifting around me. One click from the left, then another slightly ahead on the right. Never overlapping, never frantic, just patient. I stopped and looked up into the trees. The sound cut off so cleanly it was unsettling, like someone had flipped a switch. I stood there longer than I meant to, scanning the branches. The moon was bright enough that I could see leaves and empty sky between them. Nothing moved. No birds flushing, no squirrels scrambling. Even the crickets seemed quieter, like they were holding their breath. I told myself I was getting into my head. That happens when you walk alone at night. I checked my phone, 10:41. Still had signal, battery fine. I texted my friend Marcus something dumb like, "Night walks are creepy lol," and shoved the phone back into my pocket. As soon as I took another step, the clicking started again. This time it was closer. I felt it in my chest more than my ears, like a pressure change you notice before you hear thunder. The clicks weren't louder, just heavier. I stopped, looked up, silence. I tried something then. I took one step forward, then froze mid-step. The clicking cut out instantly, like it had been waiting for that exact moment. I didn't like that. I backed up a step instead of moving forward. The clicking came back, almost curious. 2 clicks, then a pause, then one more. My skin prickled. I turned slowly in a circle, trying to pinpoint anything. Movement, shadows that didn't belong. The trail behind me looked normal. The path ahead disappeared into darker trees. Above me was just sky and branches. I started walking faster. The clicking kept pace, not rushing, not falling behind. It circled me, staying just far enough away that I couldn't place it. Every time I glanced up, it stopped. Every single time. The silence after each look was wrong somehow, too empty, like sound itself had been pulled away. My heart was pounding now, but I didn't want to run. Running felt like the wrong move, like it would turn this into something else. I focused on my steps, counted them in my head. 30 steps in, something changed. The clicking stopped, but not the way it had before. It didn't cut off clean, it faded like someone slowly closing a door. At the same time, the air around me felt different, thicker. My ears popped slightly, the way they do when you go up a mountain too fast. For a second, I felt off balance, like the ground had shifted under me by a few inches. I stopped walking again. Above the trees, something moved. It wasn't bright at first, just a faint dimness, like a patch of sky that didn't match the rest. It slid sideways between the clouds, smooth and steady. No blinking, no sound, just motion. As I stared, it brightened slightly, enough that I could tell it wasn't a star or plane. It was too low, too controlled. The clicking didn't come back, but I could feel it then. This low, vibrating sense in my chest, like standing near heavy machinery. I whispered, "What the hell?" without meaning to. The thing above shifted position, not closer, not farther, just adjusted. The pressure in my ears increased for a second, then dropped away. The light vanished. Not like it turned off, More like it slipped behind something that wasn't there. The forest sounds came back all at once. Crickets, leaves, a car horn far off. I hadn't realized how quiet it had gotten until everything returned. I stood there shaking, staring at the empty sky. Nothing else happened. I didn't wait for it to start again. I turned around and walked back the way I came, fast but controlled, like if I moved too suddenly, I'd break some unspoken rule. I didn't hear the clicking again. I didn't look up. When I reached the gravel road, the street lights felt painfully bright, normal in a way that almost made me dizzy. I checked my phone again, 10:58. I frowned. That didn't make sense. I hadn't been out that long. The loop usually took 20 minutes, maybe 25 if I dragged my feet. I tried to piece it together in my head, but everything after the clicking started felt blurry, like time had folded in on itself. When I got home, my hands were still shaking. I locked the door, checked the windows, then checked them again. I stood in my living room for a long time, listening. No clicking, no hum, just the house settling. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, Marcus texted back asking what I meant about the night walk. I stared at the message for a while before replying something vague. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding like I'd lost it. I went back to the trail a few days later during the afternoon. Same path, same trees. Everything looked normal. I stood where I thought it had happened and listened. Nothing. But sometimes now, when I'm outside at night and everything goes quiet all at once, I get this strong urge not to look up. Like whatever caused the clicking is still there, waiting for me to notice it again. I was already halfway down Maple Ridge when I noticed the light. It was close to midnight, the kind of late where the neighborhood felt abandoned, but not asleep. Porch lights were off, windows dark, no traffic. I'd gone out for a walk because I couldn't focus at home. Too much noise in my head, not enough anywhere else. That stretch of road curved along a line of trees and empty lots, and I'd walked it enough times that my body knew it without thinking. I looked up because the sky felt brighter than it should have been. At first, it looked like a star slipping out from behind a cloud. One steady white point, not blinking, not pulsing. I didn't stop walking. I barely registered it. Planes crossed over all the time, and satellites were easy to spot if you paid attention, but something about it felt off. It was low. Lower than a satellite, but higher than any drone I'd seen, and it wasn't moving the way planes did. No straight line speed, no gradual fade. It was drifting. I slowed my pace without meaning to. The light slowed too. That got my attention. I stopped walking. The light stopped. Not faded, not dimmed, just paused. Suspended in the same spot above the trees like it had hit an invisible wall. I stood there with my hands in my jacket pockets, staring up. My first thought was that it was coincidence, perspective, some trick of depth and motion. Your brain loved doing that when it was tired. I took one step forward. The light moved, same direction, same speed. I stopped again. It stopped. A weird pressure settled in my chest like the air had thickened. Everything around me felt too still. No wind in the leaves, no insects. Even the distant highway noise seemed muted. I laughed quietly, more out of nerves than humor, and started walking again, deliberately this time. Faster. The light matched me perfectly. I slowed to a crawl. It slowed. I turned around and walked the other way. The light changed direction instantly, gliding back across the sky to stay aligned with me. That's when my stomach dropped. I wasn't being followed exactly. It didn't feel like something chasing me. It felt like something was anchored to my position. Like I was the thing moving and it was adjusting around me. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and craned my neck back until it hurt. The light waited. I checked my phone. No notifications. Signal was there, but the compass app spun for a second before settling in the wrong direction. I locked the screen and slipped it back into my pocket without trying to take a photo. I didn't want to break whatever weird balance had formed. I started walking again toward home this time. The light came with me. Every step I took, it slid across the sky. When I paused to retie my shoe, it froze. When I leaned forward, it shifted forward. When I stepped back, it adjusted backward. At one point, I crossed under a streetlight, and the glare forced me to look down. When I glanced back up, the light was still there, exactly where it should have been. The realization crept in slowly and made my skin prickle. It wasn't reacting to where I was. It was reacting to when I moved. I tested it. I took one step forward and stopped mid-stride, freezing with my foot hovering an inch above the ground. The light moved during that half step and then halted when I did. I felt suddenly exposed, like I'd stepped into a spotlight without realizing it. I kept going. The closer I got to my street, the more wrong everything felt. Houses I knew well looked flat and unfamiliar, like sets built too quickly. My footsteps sounded delayed, like the sound wasn't syncing up right. I stopped again, right at the corner. The light stopped. I stayed there longer this time. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing changed. I whispered, "Okay," to nobody. When I started walking again, the light followed like it had been waiting. I made it to my driveway and stood there, staring up at the patch of sky above my neighbor's roof where the light hovered. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what I expected it to do next, but I couldn't bring myself to go inside yet. I took one step backward. The light slid backward. I took 2 steps forward. It followed. I felt stupid, standing there playing this silent game with something I didn't understand, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know where the boundary was. I turned and walked up the driveway. The light stayed aligned until the roof blocked my view. I went inside and locked the door, leaning my forehead against it for a second. The house felt hollow, like it had been waiting too. I didn't sleep much that night. The next evening I told myself it had been stress, fatigue, my brain misfiring. I almost didn't go out, but the urge to check was stronger than the fear. I took the same route, same time, same weather. Nothing happened for the first 10 minutes. Then, just past the park, the light appeared again. Same brightness, same height. I stopped immediately. It stopped. There was no denying it anymore. I walked. It moved. I stopped. It froze. This time I stayed out longer. I walked in loops, doubled back, paused at random intervals. Each time, the light responded perfectly, like it was tied to some invisible marker above my head. I sped up to a jog. It kept pace. I slowed to a near standstill. It slowed too. It never drifted ahead, never lagged behind, never overshot. It felt less like it was watching me and more like it was tracking a variable. Like movement itself was the trigger. At one point, I stood completely still for so long my legs started to ache. The light hung there, unwavering. I felt an overwhelming sense of being observed, not in a personal way, but in the way a machine observes data. Neutral, detached, precise. I went home again. Same ending. As soon as I stepped inside, the light vanished. The third time it happened, something changed. I stopped walking in the middle of the street and didn't move for a long time. Cars didn't pass. Windows stayed dark. After maybe a minute, the light shifted, just slightly. It drifted sideways on its own, breaking the pattern for the first time. My heart jumped. It moved a little farther, then stopped, like it had decided to disengage. I didn't move. I barely breathed. After a few seconds, it slid away toward the horizon and faded into the clouds. I stood there long after it was gone. I still go on late walks. I don't know why. Habit, maybe, or waiting. Sometimes I stop for no reason at all and stand perfectly still, listening to the quiet, watching the sky. When I do, I get this strange feeling, like I'm being measured again. So far, nothing has come back. I was already tense because the fog came in fast and thick, the kind that turns a familiar road into something narrow and unfamiliar. I was driving home from a late shift at the marina office, just paperwork and locking up. Nothing dramatic. It was a little after midnight. The weather app had said patchy fog, which felt like a lie. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet, and my headlights just made the fog glow white instead of helping. The road followed the edge of the marsh for a few miles before cutting inland. I'd driven it hundreds of times. I knew where the bends were without thinking about them. That night, though, everything felt slightly off, like the road was longer than usual. No wind, no rain, just this heavy, damp stillness. I rolled the window down a crack because the air inside the car felt stale, like it wasn't moving. That's when I saw it. At first, it looked like a darker patch in the fog right above the center of the road ahead. My brain tried to sort it into something normal. A low cloud, trick of the headlights, exhaust from a truck that had passed earlier. But as I got closer, it didn't move or swirl like fog usually does. It stayed in one place. It was shaped wrong, not sharp or defined, just solid in a way fog isn't, like a shadow that didn't belong to anything. It hovered maybe 10 or 15 feet above the pavement, centered over the lane, wide enough that it blocked the glow of my headlights behind it. I couldn't see through it. The fog around it was still bright, but that spot stayed dark. I slowed down without really deciding to. My foot just eased off the gas. The engine sounded too loud in the quiet, like it didn't belong there either. I remember thinking I should stop completely, but I didn't want to be sitting still in that fog. Something about that felt worse. As I got closer, I tried to focus on details, but there weren't any. No edges, no surface, just a dark mass hanging there, perfectly still. It didn't sway or drift. It didn't react to the car at all. No sound came from it, no sense of movement. It felt less like an object and more like a gap where something should have been. I glanced down at the dashboard for maybe half a second, checking my speed. When I looked back up, it was still there, but now it felt closer, even though I knew that didn't make sense. The distance between us hadn't changed much. The road markings rolled under my tires like normal. Everything was still working the way it should have. Then, as I reached the spot where it had been hovering, the fog thinned all at once. Not gradually, just gone, like someone had lifted a curtain. The road ahead was suddenly clear, the marsh visible again on either side, the reflective posts lining the shoulder glowing in my headlights. And the thing was gone. I passed under where it should have been, heart pounding, hands tight on the steering wheel. I checked the rearview mirror immediately, expecting to see it behind me, but there was nothing. Just an empty stretch of road disappearing into thin fog farther back. I pulled over a few hundred yards later, more out of instinct than choice. I put the car in park and sat there listening. No hum, no wind, no insects. The fog hadn't come back yet, and the night felt too open without it, like I was exposed. I got out of the car, which surprised me later when I thought about it. I'm not the kind of person who gets out of the car in the middle of nowhere at night, but something about needing to see for myself pushed me. The air was cold and smelled like salt and mud. My breath looked normal. The road surface was dry. No marks, no disturbance. Nothing above me but a blank, starless sky. I stood there for maybe a minute, maybe longer. Time felt slippery. I kept expecting the fog to roll back in, or the darkness to gather again in that same spot, but it didn't. Everything stayed stubbornly normal. I got back in the car and drove the rest of the way home without stopping again. The fog returned a mile later, just as thick as before, like it had been waiting. I didn't see anything else on the drive, but I kept glancing at the clock. At one point, I realized I didn't remember the last turn I'd taken. I knew I must have taken it because I was on the right road, but the memory just wasn't there. Not blank exactly, just missing. When I got home, the porch light was on like I'd left it. I locked the door behind me and stood in the kitchen for a while, listening to the fridge hum and the house settle. Everything sounded normal, but it all felt slightly muted, like I was hearing it through a wall. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that dark shape hanging in the fog, perfectly still, waiting for something. Waiting for me, maybe. I kept replaying the moment when the fog cleared, trying to understand how it happened so suddenly. Fog doesn't behave like that. It doesn't just stop. The next morning I drove the same road in full daylight. Clear sky, no haze at all. The marsh looked the same as it always did. No signs of anything unusual. I slowed at the spot where I thought I'd seen it, but nothing stood out. No odd landmarks, no strange feelings. Just asphalt and grass and water. I told myself it had been exhaustion, eyes playing tricks, the fog amplifying shadows. That explanation worked during the day. It didn't work at night. A few days later, I noticed my gas mileage didn't add up. The tank was lower than it should have been for the amount of driving I remembered doing. Not empty, just off enough that I noticed. I shrugged it off, but it stuck with me. I still drive that road. I don't really have a choice. But when the fog comes in heavy now, my grip tightens on the wheel, and I slow down earlier than I used to. I don't roll the window down anymore. And every time I reach that stretch by the marsh, part of me waits for the headlights to dim again, for the road ahead to fill with something darker than the fog, hanging there, silent and unmoving, exactly where it shouldn't be. The power went out while I was rinsing a mug in the sink. Everything just cut at once, no flicker, no warning, like someone had flipped a switch on the whole street. The kitchen dropped into this flat gray darkness, not pitch black, just dim enough that I could still see the counter edges. I stood there for a second, listening. No fridge hum, no AC. Even the distant highway noise seemed muted. I walked to the front window, wiping my hands on my jeans. A few houses down, I saw porch lights go dark one by one like they were all connected. Mrs. Calder's place across the street disappeared completely except for the pale rectangle of her living room window, where she still had candles burning. She always did that during outages. I checked my phone. No signal bars. Battery was fine, but everything felt delayed, like the screen brightness wasn't quite right. That's when I noticed the sky. It wasn't dark in the way a night sky usually was. It had this dull, silvery look to it, like someone had laid a thin sheet of metal over everything. No stars, no clouds, just this even, colorless glow stretching from horizon to horizon. At first, I thought it was light pollution doing something weird without the streetlights on. But the glow wasn't coming from below. It felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. I stepped out onto the porch. The air felt heavy, like right before a thunderstorm, but it was warm and still. No wind, no insects, no barking dogs. The entire street was quiet. I walked down the steps and onto the sidewalk, craning my neck back. The sky didn't move. It didn't pulse or shimmer. It just sat there, flat and wrong, like a ceiling too low overhead. A car was stopped in the middle of the intersection at the end of the block. The driver's side door was open, and a guy I didn't recognize was standing half in the road, staring straight up with his hands on his hips. I called out to him, but my voice sounded small and swallowed, like it didn't travel. He didn't respond. I took a few steps closer, and that's when the feeling hit me. Not fear exactly, more like awareness. Like something had shifted, and I was suddenly aware of being noticed, not by a person, but by the situation itself. Like when you realize you're being watched on a security camera, you can't see. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The clock on the lock screen was stuck at 10:47. I don't know how long the sky stayed like that. It could have been seconds, it could have been minutes. There was no sense of time passing. My thoughts felt slow, like wading through thick water. Then, without any buildup, the glow faded. Not downward or outward, just gone. The sky snapped back to normal darkness, stars blinking back into place like they'd been waiting. At the same moment, every porch light on the street came back on. The car at the intersection lurched forward, its headlights flaring like the driver had slammed the gas without meaning to. Somewhere a dog started barking, frantic and high-pitched. I realized I was holding my breath. I went back inside. The microwave clock was blinking 12. My phone buzzed all at once with missed notifications, like it had been buffering reality and finally caught up. I sat on the couch and waited for the adrenaline to fade, telling myself it was a weird outage, some atmospheric thing, maybe my brain filling in gaps. That worked for about 5 minutes. Then I noticed the time. The clock on the stove said 11:03. I checked my phone. Same thing. I knew it had been 10:47 when I first looked. I remembered the number clearly because it was close to the hour, and I'd thought about just going to bed early. I scrolled through my messages. There was a text from my sister sent at 10:55 asking if my power was out too. I didn't remember getting it. I didn't remember hearing the phone vibrate. I didn't answer it. I went to bed eventually, but sleep didn't come easily. Every small sound made me tense. The house felt too quiet, like it had lost its background noise and never quite got it back. Sometime during the night, I woke up sweating. The room was dark, but not fully. There was a faint glow leaking through the curtains, not bright enough to light the room, just enough to outline the dresser and the door frame. I lay there, heart pounding, listening. Nothing. No hum, no wind, no insects, just pressure. That was the only way I could describe it. Like the air itself was pressing down on me, not painfully, just insistently. I rolled onto my side and reached for my phone. The screen was already on, camera app open, pointed straight up. I sat bolt upright. The glow outside vanished instantly, like it had been cut off. Sound rushed back into the room all at once, the AC kicking on, a car passing somewhere far away, the faint buzz of electricity in the walls. My ears rang like I just stood up too fast. I looked at the phone again. There was one photo taken at 2:14 a.m. It showed my ceiling, and in the center of the frame, barely visible, was a soft silvery haze. Not a shape, not a reflection. just a patch of light that didn't belong there. I checked the file info. No flash, no movement, just that single image. I didn't sleep after that. In the morning, everything looked normal. The sky was blue, birds were loud. Mrs. Calder waved at me while watering her plants like nothing unusual had happened. I asked her if she'd noticed the sky during the outage. She frowned and said, "What do you mean?" I didn't push it. The photo is still on my phone. I haven't shown it to anyone. Every time I look at it, I get that same sense of pressure, like my body remembers something my mind doesn't. Sometimes late at night, when the house goes quiet again, I'll catch myself listening. Not for a sound, but for the absence of one. Like I'm waiting for the sky to go flat and metallic again. The trail went quiet so suddenly that I thought my hearing had cut out. 1 second there were birds arguing somewhere uphill, bugs buzzing in the brush, the faint scrape of my boots on gravel. The next, nothing. No wind in the trees. No insects. Even my own breathing sounded wrong, like it was happening inside my head instead of the open air. I stopped walking without really deciding to. The silence felt heavy, like pressure in my ears when you're underwater. I remember thinking it was too early in the morning for this kind of stillness. It was just after sunrise, cold enough that my breath still fogged, but bright enough that the forest should have been waking up. I was hiking alone in the Cascades, a familiar trail I'd done dozens of times. It was my usual Saturday thing. I lived in Wenatchee then, worked a boring job at a logistics office, and hiking was how I burned off the restlessness. I told people it was for fitness, but mostly I liked being somewhere without phone service and other people. That morning, everything looked normal. Pines, wet ground from overnight drizzle, patches of fog still clinging low between the trees. The silence was the only thing that didn't fit. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, waiting for the forest to start back up again. Sometimes animals freeze when they sense something, and I figured maybe a predator had passed through. A cougar or a bear, maybe. The thought made my shoulders tighten, but I didn't feel panicked, just alert. Then I noticed the shimmer. It was ahead of me on the trail, maybe 30 yards out, right where the path bent around a cluster of rocks. At first, I thought it was mist catching the light, or heat distortion rising off wet stone. But it wasn't moving the way fog moves. It hung there, thin and uneven, like the air itself had been wrinkled. I took a step forward, slow and deliberate. My boot hit the ground and made almost no sound. That scared me more than the silence had. The shimmer didn't react. It stayed in place, faint but obvious now that I was looking straight at it. The edges weren't sharp. They wavered, like something you'd see at the edge of your vision if you stared too long at the sun, except this was directly in front of me. I remember thinking very clearly that I didn't want to walk into it. I don't know why that thought came so fast and so strong. I've walked through fog, smoke, dust storms. I've never had a physical reaction to distorted air before. But this felt wrong in a way that bypassed logic. My stomach tightened and my hands went cold inside my gloves. I checked my watch out of habit. It was still ticking. Normal time. No skipped seconds. That detail sticks with me because I remember being weirdly relieved by it. I called out, "Hey," feeling stupid the moment I did. My voice didn't echo, it didn't carry, it just sort of stopped, like the sound got absorbed before it could travel. That was when the fear really started to creep in. Not a rush of panic, but that slow realization that you're somewhere you shouldn't be. The shimmer shifted then, not away from me, not toward me. It sagged, like fabric losing tension, and for a split second I thought I saw depth behind it. Not a shape, not a figure. Just more space than should have been there. My ears rang softly, the way they do after a loud noise, except there hadn't been one. The pressure in my head increased, and I had to swallow a few times like I was on an airplane descending too fast. I took a step back. The moment my foot moved, the forest exhaled. Birds started up all at once, not gradually, but like someone had flipped a switch. Insects buzzed. Wind stirred the branches. The normal sounds came crashing back so fast it made me flinch. The shimmer ahead of me thinned, pulled upward, and dissolved into nothing like breath on cold glass. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at empty air. I didn't move for a long time. I kept waiting for something else to happen, for the silence to drop again, for the shimmer to come back. Nothing did. The trail looked ordinary. Damp dirt, scattered needles. The same bend in the path I'd seen 100 times. Eventually, I turned around and walked back the way I'd come. I told myself it was a weird atmospheric thing. Temperature inversion, light refraction, whatever. I'm not a scientist, but I know the brain fills in gaps when it's stressed. I stuck to that explanation all the way back to the trailhead. By the time I got to my car, I'd almost convinced myself it was nothing. Then I noticed my phone. It had been fully charged when I started. I always check before hiking. Now it was at 62%. That wasn't impossible, but it didn't make sense either. I hadn't used it at all. No music, no GPS, just airplane mode in my pocket. I unlocked it to check the time, and that's when I saw the step count. There was a spike. A big one. According to my phone, I'd walked an extra half-mile that morning that I couldn't account for. Not all at once, but in a tight cluster of steps logged within a 2-minute window. I stood there by my car, keys in my hand, staring at that screen, trying to map it onto my memory. I couldn't. There was no blank spot, no sense of missing time. Just that quiet stretch of trail and the shimmer that had vanished. I drove home in silence. Over the next few weeks, little things kept bothering me. Not dramatic stuff. Subtle details that didn't line up. My boots had scuff marks on the toes like I'd been scrambling over rock, but I hadn't. My left calf was sore for days, the kind of deep ache you get after overexertion. I hadn't changed my routine. I went back to the trail twice after that, once with my friend Aaron, once alone again. Nothing happened. No silence, no shimmer, just a normal forest doing normal forest things. I stopped hiking alone after that, not consciously, but gradually. I found excuses. Work got busy. Weather wasn't great. I started sticking to crowded trails closer to town. I didn't tell many people what happened. When I did, I kept it vague. Weird sensory thing, I'd say. Probably my brain. Most people nodded and moved on. Aaron asked me once why I didn't go up into the Cascades anymore. I told him I'd gotten bored of it. He didn't push. The thing that finally made it impossible to ignore happened months later, in late fall. I was lying in bed, half asleep, listening to rain tap against the window. That same pressure settled into my ears, gentle but unmistakable. Not sound, more like the absence of it. The room felt muffled, like thick insulation had been packed into the walls. My eyes snapped open. The house was quiet, too quiet. No fridge hum, no rain, no distant traffic, just that soft ringing again. I sat up, heart racing, and the pressure vanished instantly. Sound rushed back. Rain, wind, everything normal. I lay there for a long time afterwards, staring at the ceiling, not daring to close my eyes again. Nothing else has happened since. Not like that. Anyway, I still think about that shimmer sometimes. About the way the air looked stretched thin, like something heavy had passed through it and left an imprint. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it noticed me or if I just wandered too close to something that didn't care whether I was there or not. All I know is that the forest went silent, and for a moment it felt like the world had paused around me. And I haven't trusted quiet places the same way since. I was sitting on the back steps because I couldn't sleep, just letting the night burn itself out. It was late enough that the houses behind mine were dark, and the only light came from the neighbor's porch 2 doors down and the thin glow from the street at the end of the block. It had been hot all day, one of those muggy late summer days where the air doesn't really cool off at night, just gets quieter. I remember checking my phone and seeing it was 1:47 a.m. I'd been doom scrolling for a while, then set it face down on the step because the screen felt too bright. The yard was still. No wind, no bugs, which I noticed only because it felt odd. Usually there's at least some chirping, even if it's faint. That's when the pressure hit. It wasn't painful. It wasn't even dramatic. It felt exactly like the moment when you dive underwater in a pool and your ears haven't caught up yet. A soft, squeezing fullness, like the air suddenly got heavier. I swallowed automatically, like you do on an airplane, and for half a second I honestly thought maybe a storm was rolling in fast. But the sky was clear. I stood up because my balance felt slightly off, like I'd gotten up too fast. The pressure lasted maybe a second, maybe 2. Long enough for me to notice it wasn't normal. Then it eased, but the air didn't feel the same afterward. It felt thin, almost hollow, like the space around me had been scooped out a little. I remember saying, "What the hell?" out loud, quietly, like I didn't want to wake anyone up. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't bright. That's important. It wasn't a beam or a flash or anything that lit things up. It was more like a dull glow, the color of an LED that's dying. Pale, almost grayish, moving behind the clouds that weren't there a second earlier. I realized then that there were clouds, but they were high and thin, like smudges rather than shapes. The light slid sideways between two of those smudges. Smooth, no blinking, no sound. It moved at a steady pace that didn't feel fast or slow, just deliberate. I tracked it without really meaning to, my head turning as it went. I tried to tell myself it was a plane, then I tried helicopter, then drone. None of those fit. It didn't blink, it didn't wobble, and it didn't make any noise at all. Was that not even the faint hum you sometimes hear, if the neighborhood is quiet enough? The pressure came back for just a moment as the light passed overhead. Stronger this time. My ears rang softly, like when you've been somewhere loud and step into silence too fast. The light slid behind a darker patch of cloud and vanished. Not faded, not sped up, just gone. The night snapped back into place like nothing had happened. The crickets started up again all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. A breeze brushed the leaves in the yard, light and normal. I realized my hands were clenched so hard my nails had left marks in my palms. I stood there for a long time, staring at the sky, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I went back inside and locked the door, even though I knew how ridiculous that was. I checked the windows. I checked the back door again. Everything was normal. The house smelled the same. The fridge hummed. The clock on the microwave still read 1:47, which I thought was weird. But when I checked my phone, it said 1:49, so I chalked it up to the clock being slow. I barely slept that night. Every time I drifted off, I felt like the air in the room was shifting, even though it wasn't. When morning finally came, it felt too bright, like the contrast had been turned up. I tried to forget about it. That lasted about a day. The next night, around the same time, I felt it again while brushing my teeth. Just a soft pressure change, quick and gone. I froze with toothpaste foam in my mouth, staring at myself in the mirror, waiting. Nothing followed at that time. The third night, my phone battery dropped from 40% to 12 in the span of a few minutes while it sat untouched on the coffee table. I blamed the battery. Phones do that sometimes. Still, I charged it overnight even though it didn't really need it. On the fourth night, my neighbor Matt asked me if I'd been outside lately. We were both taking our trash out, standing by the curb under the streetlight. He looked tired. He works early mornings and usually doesn't chat. Why? I asked. He shrugged. Thought I saw someone standing in your yard the other night, just for a second, probably just shadows. I told him I'd been out there. I didn't tell him why. That night, I sat on the back steps again. I told myself I was being stupid, but part of me needed to see if it would happen again. The air was cooler this time. A thin layer of clouds covered most of the sky, muting the stars. Nothing happened for almost an hour. Then the pressure rolled through again, softer than before, but unmistakable. The hairs on my arms lifted. Above me, the clouds brightened just slightly. Not enough to cast light on the ground, just enough that I could see their edges more clearly. The dim glow slid between them again, slower this time. It paused, just for a moment, directly overhead. I had the overwhelming feeling of being noticed, not watched exactly, but acknowledged. Like when you make eye contact with someone across a room. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost jumped out of my skin. When I pulled it out, the screen was black. Completely dead. It had been at 80% an hour earlier. The light moved again, slipping behind the clouds and disappearing. The pressure released, leaving my ears ringing faintly. The night sounds returned, but quieter this time. Hesitant. I didn't sit outside again after that. For the next week, things stayed mostly normal except for small stuff. Electronics acting strange, my sleep tracker logging brief periods of movement in the middle of the night when I knew I hadn't gotten out of bed, the sky looking just a little too bright sometimes, like light pollution that didn't make sense. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I could point to and say, this is it. I still go outside at night sometimes, but I don't sit still anymore. I keep the porch light on. I don't look straight up for too long. Every now and then, when the air goes quiet and heavy for just a second, I feel that pressure again. And I wait, holding my breath, hoping the sky stays dark. I was sitting on the back steps with my jacket zipped up, staring at the sky because I couldn't sleep. It was late enough that the neighborhood was quiet, but not dead. Somebody's dryer thumping a block over, a car passing every now and then. The air was cold and still, the kind that makes sound travel farther than it should. I lived outside of town then, just far enough that the streetlights didn't completely drown out the stars. I'd started doing this thing where I picked one star and watched it until my eyes got tired. It helped slow my thoughts down. If you stare long enough, the sky starts to feel less huge and more like a ceiling. I picked one low in the sky, just above the tree line. It wasn't especially bright, but it stood out because it didn't twinkle much. It felt steady, solid. I remember thinking it was probably a planet, but I didn't bother checking. I watched it for a while and so waft breathing fog into my sleeves, counting my exhales. Nothing happened at first. The night felt normal. Too normal, honestly. Then the star moved. Not fast, not sudden. It slid sideways, smooth and quiet, like someone nudging a chess piece across a board. Just a little bit at first. I thought it was my eyes, so I blinked hard and looked away at the roofline, then back. It was still drifting. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Not panic, more like confusion so deep it felt physical. Stars don't do that. Planes blink, satellites glide. This didn't glide. It adjusted, corrected itself slightly, like it was staying level with something I couldn't see. I stood up without realizing I was doing it. The wood step creaked under my boot, loud as a gunshot. The star kept moving. I whispered no under my breath, like that would somehow stop it. It slid another inch across the sky, then slowed. For a second, just one, I couldn't tell if I was looking at movement or if my brain was filling it in. The star dimmed slightly, not enough to vanish, just enough to feel thinner, and then it blended back into the sky. That's the only way I can describe it. It didn't turn off, it didn't shoot away. The point of light softened, spread out, and suddenly it was just gone. Or maybe it was still there, and my eyes couldn't separate it from everything else anymore. I stood there with my mouth open, staring at the spot where it had been. The sky looked normal, completely normal. I checked other stars, comparing positions, trying to convince myself I'd picked the wrong reference point. I hadn't. My hands were shaking, not badly, but enough that I noticed. I pulled my phone out and opened a star map app, feeling stupid even as I did it. The app showed the sky exactly as it should be. No gaps, no missing points. I stayed outside another 10 minutes, then 20. Nothing else happened. The cold started to creep through my jacket, and my rational brain slowly clawed its way back in. I went inside and locked the door, which I didn't usually do that early. I stood in the kitchen for a bit, just listening. The house sounded the same as it always did. Fridge humming, pipes ticking. I told myself it was an illusion. Fatigue. Eye strain. Maybe a satellite at a weird angle. I repeated that explanation until it almost sounded reasonable. Almost. The next night, I went back out. I didn't plan to. I told myself I wouldn't. But around the same time, my body just expected something, like a habit I hadn't meant to form. It was cloudier that night. The stars were patchy, coming and going behind thin gray streaks. I sat on the steps again, hugging a mug I didn't really want, scanning the sky without focusing too hard. I didn't see the same star. At least, I don't think I did. What I did notice was how quiet it felt, not silent, just muted. The crickets had stopped, which happens sometimes, but even the distant road noise felt dampened, like someone had closed a door somewhere far away. Then one of the stars near the center of my view dimmed, not disappeared, just dulled like a light behind fog. I leaned forward, squinting. It shifted sideways. This one moved faster. Not dramatically, but enough that I couldn't pretend it was my eyes. It slid, paused, then slid again, always smooth, always controlled. No blinking, no trail. I felt that same pressure in my chest, like when an elevator stops too abruptly. I pulled my phone up again, hands clumsy, and as soon as the screen lit my face, the star stopped moving. It just stayed there. I lowered the phone slowly, watching the sky over the top edge. The star held still for a few seconds, then faded back into the background exactly like the night before. I didn't stay outside after that. I went straight to bed, locked the door again, and lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying it over and over, every time I thought I had it pinned down. Some natural explanation, some trick of light, it slipped away. Over the next week, it happened 3 more times. Not every night. Not at the same spot in the sky. Always subtle. Always brief. a star that drifted when it shouldn't, a point of light that thinned and vanished without actually going anywhere. Once I was with someone else. My neighbor Mark was over, helping me move a broken shelf out to the curb. We finished up and stood there talking, both of us looking up without really meaning to. I saw it first, a star just above the power lines, steady and bright. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Do you see that one?" Mark followed my gaze. "Yeah." The star slid, just a little. "Is it moving?" I asked. He frowned. "I don't think so." It moved again, a clean sideways shift, unmistakable. "There," I said. "That?" Mark squinted. "I don't see." The star dimmed and blended into the sky mid-sentence. Mark looked at me. "See what?" I didn't answer right away. I was still staring at the empty space, my heart pounding so hard it felt loud. "Never mind," I said finally. "Probably nothing." He shrugged and went back inside. I stayed out a bit longer, staring at a sky that suddenly felt like it was paying attention to me. After that, I stopped going outside at night. I closed the curtains earlier. I kept lights on. I tried not to look up when I walked to my car. It sounds ridiculous, but there was something about those movements that felt intentional. Not directed at me exactly. More like reactive, like when you notice someone across a room notice you back. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. My nerves settled. I started sleeping better. The explanations I'd rehearsed hardened into something I could almost believe. Then one night, lying in bed, I noticed the light in the room shift. Not brighter, not darker, just thinner. Like the air itself had changed density. I sat up, heart racing, and the feeling vanished instantly. Everything went back to normal. The house creaked. The heater kicked on. I didn't look out the window. I don't know what those stars were. I don't know if they were stars at all, or something passing in front of them, or something using them as cover. I don't know why they moved the way they did, or why they seemed to stop when I tried to capture them. All I know is that sometimes when I catch myself staring at the sky for too long, I feel that same quiet pressure in my chest, and I force myself to look away before anything has the chance to move again. I was driving home later than I meant to, coming back from my sister's place outside of town. It was one of those unplanned visits that runs long without anyone noticing. By the time I left, it was close to midnight and the fog had rolled in thick while we were inside. The road back to my place was a 2-lane highway that cut through farmland and patches of woods. No streetlights, just reflectors on the guardrails and the occasional mailbox flashing by. I drove it all the time, knew every bend and dip without thinking. That night, the fog sat low and heavy, not swirling so much as hanging there like it had weight. My headlights carved out a short tunnel in front of the car, everything beyond that swallowed up. I slowed down more than usual, radio off, window cracked just enough to hear the tires on the pavement. About 10 minutes in, I noticed the fog ahead looked different. Thicker, maybe. Not darker, exactly, just uneven, like there was a gap or a shadow inside it. I eased off the gas. At first, I thought it was a low cloud drifting across the road, or maybe exhaust from a truck I couldn't see yet. But as I got closer, the shape didn't move. It stayed right where it was, suspended above the asphalt, maybe 20 or 30 yards ahead. It wasn't touching the ground. That's what made my stomach tighten. It was dark, darker than the fog around it, like a chunk of night had been cut out and hung there, no sharp edges. Just a bulky, uneven shape, wide enough to stretch across most of the lane. It hovered a few feet above the road, low enough that my headlights brushed the bottom of it but didn't light it up. I slowed to a crawl without fully deciding to. My first clear thought was that something had fallen off a truck. A tarp, maybe. But it wasn't sagging. It wasn't flapping. It didn't react to the wind from my car at all. I remember checking my mirrors, thinking maybe I was about to hit smoke from a fire or dust kicked up by farm equipment. But there was no smell. No movement. The shape stayed perfectly still. My hands were tight on the steering wheel. I was aware of my breathing getting shallow, fast. The inside of the car felt too quiet, like the sound was being absorbed. I rolled the window down another inch, then stopped. Something about the air outside felt wrong. Not cold or warm, just empty. I came to a full stop. The car idled softly beneath me, headlights on, fog pressing in from all sides. The shape hung there, blocking the road. I stared at it for a long time. Long enough that the urge to turn around crept in, slow and insistent. I checked the clock on the dash. It was working. The seconds were ticking forward like normal. I thought about getting out of the car and immediately dismissed the idea. I didn't even reach for the door handle. The idea of standing under that thing made my chest feel tight. Instead, I nudged the car forward. The headlights pushed deeper into the fog, brushing the lower edge of the shape. Still no reflection, no detail, just absence. Then, as I got close enough that I should have been directly under it, the fog thinned all at once. Not gradually, not drifting away. It was like someone had erased it. 1 second, the shape was there, hovering over the road. The next, the air ahead was clear, and the road stretched empty and familiar in front of me. I slammed the brakes hard enough to jolt myself against the seatbelt. There was nothing there. No debris. No marks on the pavement. No shadow. Just open road, the faint glow of my headlights, and fields disappearing into darkness on either side. The fog behind me stayed thick. Ahead of me, it was clear for a long stretch, like I'd crossed some invisible line. I sat there with my foot on the brake, heart pounding, scanning the road, the ditches, the sky above the tree line. Nothing moved. No sound except my engine and my own breathing. After a few seconds, the fog began creeping forward again, slowly filling in the space ahead, like it was reclaiming it. I didn't wait. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping, barely aware of my speed, eyes flicking constantly between the road and the edges of the fog. Every time the headlights caught a thicker patch, my pulse jumped. When I got home, I sat in the driveway longer than usual, engine still running, listening. The neighborhood was quiet, normal. Porch lights, a dog barking somewhere far off. Inside, everything felt slightly off. Not wrong in a dramatic way, just muted, like the house was holding its breath. I checked the windows, the locks, the back door. Everything was fine. I barely slept. The next morning, I drove that same stretch of road in daylight. Clear sky, no fog, nothing out of place. I even pulled over near where I thought it had happened and walked along the shoulder, feeling stupid the whole time. There was nothing. No scorch marks, no broken grass, no sign that anything had ever been there. I told myself it was fog playing tricks on my eyes, that I'd been tired, that the darkness had filled in gaps my brain couldn't handle. But a week later, I ran into a guy named Trevor at the gas station near my work. We weren't close, just the kind of people who recognized each other from around town. He mentioned the fog the other night, how bad it had been on the highway. "Yeah," I said carefully. "Weird fog." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Did you see anything strange?" My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know. Probably nothing. Thought I saw something over the road, like a shadow or something. Then it was gone." I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I just nodded and said, "Fog does that." Since then, I've driven that road dozens of times. Most nights, it's just a road, just fog, just darkness and headlights. But every once in a while, when the fog is thick and the world narrows down to that small tunnel of light, I get this feeling that I'm approaching something, like the road is about to end in midair. When that happens, I slow down without thinking, and I keep my eyes forward. I don't look too hard into the fog anymore. The first alert came at 2:17 a.m., and it woke me up because my phone wouldn't stop buzzing on the nightstand. I fumbled for it, half asleep, already annoyed. We'd had false alarms before. Moths, rain, a raccoon once. I expected the same thing. The notification just said motion detected, side yard camera. I opened the app, squinting at the screen. The clip loaded, grainy black and white footage from the infrared camera. It showed the side of my house, the fence line, the trash bins. Nothing was moving. Then for about half a second, the entire frame washed out in white. Not like headlights or a flashlight. It was more like the exposure spiked all at once. Then it went back to normal. That was it. I scrubbed back and replayed it 3 times. Same thing. No shapes, no shadows, no person. Just that brief flash, like the camera blinked. I checked the timestamp. 2:70 a.m., I set the phone down and tried to go back to sleep. I remember lying there thinking about how quiet the house felt. No AC kicking on, no cars passing. Even the usual hum from the fridge seemed distant. I eventually fell asleep again. The next morning, while making coffee, I checked the system on the tablet in the kitchen. There were 3 alerts overnight, all from the same camera, all at 2:17 a.m. on the dot. Each clip showed the same thing. Nothing, then a flash. I mentioned it to my wife, Erin, while she was packing lunches for the kids. Probably a bug flying close to the lens, she said without looking up. Or a software thing. Every night at the exact same second? I asked. She shrugged. Reboot it later. I forgot about it for most of the day. That night, I stayed up later than usual. I didn't tell Erin why. I just said I couldn't sleep and ended up on the couch with the TV on low. Around 2:10, I muted it and waited. The house creaked like it always did. Pipes ticking, the faint rush of cars on the highway a mile away. At 2:17, my phone buzzed. Side yard camera. I opened the app immediately. Same flash, same empty frame. What I hadn't noticed before was the sound. There was audio on the clip. Normally it was just ambient noise, wind, distant traffic, maybe a dog barking somewhere. This time during the flash, there was a low click. Not loud, not sharp, more like a soft electrical tap. I replayed it, volume up, click, then nothing. I got up and walked to the kitchen window that looked out onto the side yard. The night was clear, no motion lights on, no cars, just the fence and the neighbor's dark house beyond it. I stood there for a while, listening. Everything sounded normal again. The next night, it happened again, and the night after that. Always 2:17 a.m., same camera, same flash, same quiet click. I checked the system logs, no errors, no firmware updates, no explanation. I repositioned the camera, cleaned the lens, adjusted sensitivity, nothing changed. On the fourth night, a second camera triggered, the one pointed at the backyard. Same time, same flash, two different angles, two different views, both washed out at the same instant. The flashes weren't identical either. The backyard one looked slightly dimmer, like it was farther from whatever caused it. That's when I started feeling genuinely unsettled. I showed Erin the clips the next morning. She frowned, watching them back to back. "That's weird," she said, "but it's probably just some glitch." "Why only at night?" I asked. "Why the same minute?" She didn't answer that. I checked the kids' room cameras next. No alerts, no flashes, just normal footage. On the sixth night, I stayed awake again. This time, I sat at the dining table with my laptop open, watching the live feed from the side yard camera. 2:16 a.m. came and went. At 2:17 exactly, the live feed didn't flash. Instead, it froze. The image locked in place for about 1 second, then updated. The motion alert came through a half second later, like the system was catching up. The recording showed the flash, the live feed never did. That messed with me more than the flashes themselves. I stepped outside onto the back porch without thinking. The air felt heavy, like before a storm, even though the forecast was clear. I looked up. The sky over our house looked wrong. Not dramatically, just slightly brighter than it should have been. Like the darkness had been thinned out. It faded after a few seconds. I went back inside, heart pounding, and locked the door. The next day, I called the security company. They ran diagnostics remotely, told me everything looked normal, suggested maybe nearby electrical interference. "From what?" I asked. "Could be anything," the guy said. "Power lines, industrial equipment, even atmospheric stuff." We didn't live near any of that. On the eighth night, I noticed something new. The timestamp on the clip still read 2:17 a.m., but the duration was longer. Instead of a single flash, there were two. The first was faint, the second was brighter. Between them, the camera picked up a brief distortion. The image warped slightly, like heat shimmer, even though it was cold out. The audio caught something else too, a low tone just under the range where you're sure you're hearing it. It lasted maybe half a second. I didn't sleep after that. On the ninth night, Erin woke up around 2:20 and found me standing in the hallway staring at my phone. "Are you okay?" she asked. "It happened again," I said. She watched the clip, then looked at me differently than before. Less dismissive, more careful. "Did you go outside?" she asked. "No." She nodded, like she'd already been worried about that. On the 10th night, every exterior camera triggered at once. Front yard, side yard, backyard. All at 2:17 a.m. The flashes weren't uniform. The front yard camera showed the brightest one yet, a clean white burst that erased the image completely for a full second. The side yard showed the usual washout. The backyard barely flashed at all. None of them showed a source. I checked the timestamps again. All exactly the same. What scared me most wasn't the light. It was the stillness afterward. No wind noise, no insects. Even the audio felt hollow, like something had sucked the sound out of the space for a moment. After that night, the alerts stopped. No flashes, no clicks, nothing. The cameras went back to normal, like nothing had ever happened. I told myself it was over, that whatever glitch it was had resolved itself. 2 weeks later, I checked the system logs while deleting old footage. There was an entry I didn't recognize, no camera name, no clip attached, just a system note at 2:17 a.m., motion event acknowledged. That phrase didn't appear anywhere else in the logs. Ever. I scrolled back through months of data, nothing like it. That same night, I stood in the backyard just before going to bed, looking up at the sky. It was overcast, stars hidden. The darkness felt thicker directly above the house, like a low ceiling. At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed once. No alert, just a vibration. I looked at the cameras the next morning. No footage, but every exterior camera showed the exact same timestamp gap. 1 second missing. Cleanly cut, like it had been removed. Nothing else has happened since. The system works, the alerts are normal, life goes on. But sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I check the time without meaning to. And if it's close to 2:17, I don't look at my phone. I just lie there, listening, waiting to see if the house will go quiet again. My dog stopped before I did. 1 second, Milo was trotting along like always, nose down, tail loose, the leash slack in my hand. The next, he planted his feet and leaned back like he'd hit an invisible wall. I almost walked into him. It was just after 9 p.m., early fall, one of those nights where it wasn't cold yet, but the air felt thinner than usual. I'd taken the long loop through the older part of the neighborhood, the one with big trees and no streetlights for half a block at a time. "Come on," I said, giving the leash a gentle tug. He didn't move. He wasn't growling or barking, just staring ahead with his ears slightly back. That alone wasn't weird. Milo froze like that sometimes if he smelled a cat or heard something I couldn't. What caught my attention was my shadow. It stretched out in front of me, long and sharp, angled toward the houses instead of back toward the streetlight behind us. For a split second, my brain tried to correct it, like I was misjudging where the light was coming from. I turned around. The streetlight was still on, humming faintly, casting the same dull yellow cone it always did. Nothing behind me that should have changed anything. But my shadow didn't line up with it. It was pulling forward too long, like there was another light source somewhere ahead of us. Except the road in front was darker, not brighter. I took a step forward. The shadow stretched farther, exaggerated, almost cartoonish. Milo whimpered quietly. That's when I noticed the light. It wasn't bright. That's the thing. It was more like a pale glow, high above the trees, barely strong enough to register unless you were already looking for it. The color reminded me of moonlight through fog, except the sky was clear and the moon was nowhere near that part of the sky. The glow didn't move fast, it just hung there. I felt stupid standing in the middle of the sidewalk, staring upward, but I couldn't stop. There was a pressure in my ears like the moment before they pop on a plane, and my chest felt tight in a way that didn't quite hurt. The light dimmed slightly, and my shadow snapped back to normal. It didn't slide or fade. It just corrected itself instantly, like a rubber band released. Same length, same angle as it should have been all along. Milo immediately started pulling forward, tail tucked, nails clicking on the concrete. He wanted to go home, and for once I didn't argue. I didn't look back up again. I walked fast the rest of the way, keys already between my fingers by the time our house came into view. I kept telling myself it was some weird angle, maybe a car cresting a hill somewhere, maybe my eyes playing tricks in the dark. Inside, everything felt normal again. Too normal. Milo drank half his water bowl in one go, then curled up tight on the rug instead of following me around like usual. I didn't tell my wife Hannah about it that night. She was already asleep, and I didn't feel like trying to explain something I didn't understand myself. The next evening, I took Milo out earlier. I paid attention to my shadow the entire time, probably looking ridiculous, checking angles, glancing at the ground more than the street. Everything behaved exactly how it should. I almost convinced myself it was nothing. On the third night, it happened again. Different street, different time, same dog. We were cutting through a short path that connected two cul-de-sacs, a narrow strip of sidewalk with trees close on both sides. There was a single lamp at the far end, dim and flickering like it always did. Milo slowed before I did this time. Not a full stop, but cautious. I looked down, my shadow was wrong again. This time it wasn't stretched forward. It was angled sharply to the left, cutting across the sidewalk and into the grass, even though the only visible light source was directly behind us. I followed the shadow with my eyes, tracing it back. The glow was back. Lower this time. Closer. I could see it clearly between the branches, a dull, rounded brightness that didn't blink or flicker. It wasn't harsh enough to light the ground, but it was strong enough to mess with the shadows. I realized I couldn't hear anything. No insects. No distant traffic. No wind in the leaves. Milo sat down, which he never did on walks unless he was exhausted or scared. He stared upward, head tilted slightly, like he was tracking something I couldn't quite see. The glow pulsed once, very gently. My shadow snapped back into place. Sound rushed back in all at once. Crickets, leaves, the faint hiss of tires somewhere nearby. Milo stood up immediately and started pulling again. I got home shaking. This time I told Hannah. She listened quietly, arms crossed, face unriddable. When I finished, she didn't laugh or brush it off, which somehow made it worse. "Maybe stop walking that route at night," she said. "At least for a while." I agreed too quickly. For the next week, I stuck to well-lit streets, earlier walks, shorter loops. Nothing happened. Milo went back to normal. I slept better. Then one night, Hannah was late getting home from work. I took Milo out around 10, figuring one quick loop wouldn't hurt. Halfway down our own street, the shadow shifted. I hadn't even looked up yet. I just knew. This time, the shadow shortened instead of stretching, collapsing inward like the light source was directly above us. It pooled beneath my feet in a way that made no sense at all. I slowly raised my head. The glow was almost directly overhead now, barely visible against the sky, like a patch of brightness where the darkness had thinned. It wasn't circular. The edges were uneven, soft, like light seen through rippling water. I felt that pressure again, stronger this time. My heart was racing, but my body felt heavy, like moving through syrup. Milo lay down flat on the sidewalk. The glow dimmed. For a split second, my shadow went the wrong way entirely, stretching upward, climbing the side of the house next to us, warped and tall and not shaped like me at all. Then the light faded. Everything snapped back into place. A car turned onto the street. Porch lights glowed. Milo scrambled to his feet, whining softly. I didn't finish the walk. The next morning, I checked my phone without knowing why. The health app showed my heart rate spiking around 10:07 p.m., then dropping sharply. There was a 2-minute gap in the data where nothing recorded at all. I didn't remember losing time. Not exactly, just a fuzzy stretch between noticing the glow and hearing the car. After that, I started noticing other things. My outdoor security camera showed subtle exposure changes around the same time of night. Not enough to trigger alerts, but enough that I could see the image brighten and dim slightly if I scrubbed through the footage. Milo refused to go out after dark anymore. He'd plant himself by the door and shake until I brought him back inside. I stopped walking at night entirely. Weeks passed, nothing else happened. The anxiety dulled, but it didn't go away. One evening, just before sunset, I was standing in the backyard when I caught my shadow stretching the wrong way again. Just for a moment. So brief I almost missed it. I looked up. Nothing there. But the air felt tight, like it was waiting for something. It's been months now. I still check my shadow without thinking whenever I'm outside. I still feel that pressure sometimes, especially at night, especially when the sky is clear and quiet. Nothing bad has happened, no missing people, no strange marks, no answers, just the sense that whatever caused it noticed me, noticing. And that if I look up at the wrong moment again, it might not snap back next time. The power went out at 8:43 p.m. exactly. I knew because my oven clock blinked off and I was standing right there pouring pasta into a pot when the kitchen went dark. Not a flicker. Just gone. The hum of the fridge stopped mid-note like someone cut a wire with scissors. I stood there for a second, holding the box, waiting for the lights to come back. They didn't. I looked out the window over the sink. The houses across the street were dark too. Porch lights off. Street lights off. The whole block looked flat and empty, like a photo that hadn't loaded yet. There wasn't any weather, no wind, no rain. The sky had been clear all day, warm for early fall. I remember thinking it was weird for the power to go out on a night like that. I set the pasta down and grabbed my phone from the counter. No signal issues. A couple texts came through at the same time. One from my sister, Mara, "Did your power just go out?" One from my neighbor, Kyle, 2 doors down, "Lights out for you too?" I texted both back yes. No explanation, just yes. I went to the living room and lit a candle from the junk drawer. The flame looked steady, no drafts. The house felt heavier without the usual background noise. No AC, no fridge, no distant TV sounds bleeding through walls. Just quiet. I checked the time again, 8:45. I sat on the couch and waited. I figured it would come back in a minute or two. It usually did. That's when I noticed the clouds. I hadn't realized it had clouded over at all. When I looked up through the front window, the sky was covered in a smooth layer of low clouds. Not storm clouds, no texture to them, just a flat gray ceiling. Then they lit up. It wasn't bright, not like lightning, more like someone slowly turned on a dim light behind them. The clouds took on this dull, pale glow, almost white but not quite. It reminded me of the way the sky looks during a full moon, except there was no moon out. I'd checked earlier. The glow spread evenly, like it wasn't coming from any one point. The whole patch of sky above the street just brightened. I stood up without realizing I was doing it. I waited for thunder. Nothing. The glow held for maybe 3 seconds. Long enough for my brain to register that it wasn't normal. Long enough for my stomach to start tightening. Then it faded. Not suddenly. Just eased back to dark, like someone turned the dimmer down. The street stayed silent. No thunder, no rain, no flicker of lightning after. I realized my candle flame hadn't reacted at all. No movement, no change. I walked to the front door and opened it. Kyle was already outside, standing on his porch in socks and a hoodie, looking up. Across the street, Mrs. Henson had her door open too. She was holding her phone up like she'd been recording, but her screen was dark. "Did you see that?" Kyle asked without looking at me. I said yes. "What the hell was that?" he said. "I don't know," I said. My voice sounded too loud. A few more doors opened down the block. People stepped out onto porches and driveways. Everyone was looking up at the same part of the sky. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else said it was probably lightning behind the clouds. But no one sounded convinced. I checked my phone again. No weather alerts, no emergency notifications, just a missed call from my mom that came through late. I tried calling her back. It rang, then went to voicemail. While we were standing there, the power came back on. Every house lit up at once. Street lights, porch lights, everything. No flicker, just on. A few people clapped, like that settled it. Kyle exhaled and laughed, rubbing his hands together. "Probably just a transformer or something," he said. "Yeah," I said, even though I didn't know why clouds would glow because of that. Everyone drifted back inside. Doors closed. The street went back to normal. I went back in too, but I didn't feel settled. The house felt different now. Not wrong, exactly. Just thinner, like the walls weren't doing as much as they used to. I finished cooking, but I didn't really taste the food. I kept replaying the glow in my head, how even it had been, how quiet. At 9:12, my phone buzzed with a text from Mara. "Okay, this is weird, but did the sky look bright where you are for a sec?" I called her instead of texting back. She answered right away. "Tell me you saw it too." I told her everything. The timing, the glow. No thunder. She went quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm in my backyard. It's clear here. No clouds, but the sky still looked wrong, like it was lit up without a source." That part stuck with me. After we hung up, I walked through the house checking lights, outlets, appliances. Everything worked fine. The clocks had reset, but that was it. Before bed, I stepped outside again. The clouds were still there, darker now, no glow, just a normal, overcast sky. Crickets had started up again, loud and steady. I stood on the porch for a while, listening. That night, I woke up at 2:18 a.m. for no reason I could pinpoint. My room was dark, but not as dark as it should have been. There was a faint grayness to the air, like early morning light, except it was the middle of the night. I held my breath and listened. No hum, no vibration, just quiet. I checked my phone. No notifications, no missed calls. The sky outside my bedroom window looked normal again. Dark, flat. In the morning, the local utility company posted a short update online. Brief outage affecting several neighborhoods. Cause under investigation. No mention of weather. No mention of unusual activity. Over the next few days, I asked around. Some people noticed the glow. Some didn't. A couple said they'd been inside and only realized something happened when their clocks blinked. Mrs. Henson said she checked her phone video later. The recording cut out right when the sky brightened. Just a frozen frame, and then black. Kyle said his security camera didn't capture anything either. It logged a motion event at 8:44, but the clip was empty. A week later, the power went out again. This time, it was only for about 10 seconds. I was in the shower when it happened. The bathroom went dark, and through the frosted window, I saw the same pale light wash over the glass. I didn't wait to see it fade. I shut off the water and stood there, heart racing, counting under my breath. When the lights came back, I checked the time. 8:43 p.m. Same minute. Since then, I've started paying attention to the sky more than I ever used to, especially on quiet nights when there's no weather and no reason for anything to happen. So far, it hasn't happened again. But sometimes, when the house is still and the lights are on and everything feels normal, I catch myself waiting for the glow. I was sitting on the back steps with a mug of coffee, watching the horizon because I couldn't sleep. It was too early for sunrise, still an hour at least, but the sky had that faint pre-dawn gray that makes everything look unfinished. The air was cold enough that my breath showed, and the yard smelled like wet dirt and old leaves. That was when the horizon started to glow. At first I thought my eyes were just adjusting, or that maybe the sun was coming up earlier than I realized. The glow wasn't orange or pink like a normal sunrise. It was pale, almost white, spread thin and even, like someone had turned on a dim light behind the hills. It sat low just above the tree line, and it was steady. No flicker, no color. I checked my phone, 4:47 a.m. I stared at the glow and waited for it to change, to warm up or climb higher. It didn't. It just sat there, flat and calm, bright enough that the silhouettes of the trees sharpened against it. The birds didn't react. No early chirping, no sudden movement. Everything stayed quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like the world was holding still. Then the glow moved. It didn't spread or brighten. It lifted, slowly, smoothly, like a curtain being pulled upward. The light peeled away from the horizon and rose into the sky, keeping the same shape, the same brightness, just climbing straight up. The land beneath it dropped back into darkness as it passed, the hills and trees fading into shadow again. I stood up without realizing I was doing it. My coffee spilled down the steps, steam rising from the splash, and I didn't even look at it. The glow kept rising. It didn't cast light on the clouds because there were no clouds. It didn't reflect off anything. It was just there, hovering now, no longer connected to the horizon at all. And then it was gone. Not fading, not dimming, just gone, like someone had switched it off. The sky snapped back to its normal pre-dawn darkness, stars visible again where the glow had been. I stood there with my hands clenched at my sides, waiting for something else to happen. A sound, a feeling, anything. Nothing did. The cold felt sharper after that, like I'd just stepped outside from a warm room, even though I'd been out there the whole time. The quiet felt heavier. I realized my ears were ringing slightly, not the way they do after a sudden change in pressure. I checked my phone again, 4:49 a.m. 2 minutes had passed. It felt longer. I stayed outside until the actual sunrise, which came when it was supposed to. Slow and orange and familiar. By then, my coffee was cold and my hands were numb. I kept replaying the way the light had lifted, straight up, clean and controlled. Later that morning, I mentioned it to my neighbor Ron when he walked his dog past my fence. He squinted at the sky like he might still see something there and said maybe it was a weird reflection from the highway, even though the highway was miles away and below the hills. That night, I sat outside again. I told myself I was just enjoying the quiet. The truth was I was waiting. Nothing happened the first night, or the second. I started to feel stupid, like I'd overreacted to something explainable and rare. Light does weird things sometimes. The atmosphere bends it. The brain fills in gaps. On the fourth morning, I woke up before my alarm, heart already beating fast, like my body knew something was coming. I pulled on a jacket and went outside. The horizon was dark. The stars were sharp and steady. I waited, staring so hard my eyes watered. At 4:46 a.m., the glow appeared again. Same place, same color, same soft, even brightness. It outlined the trees exactly the same way, like it was following a template. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The glow lifted. As it rose, I noticed something I hadn't the first time. The stars behind it weren't disappearing the way they would behind a cloud or fog. They were still there, just slightly distorted, like I was looking at them through thick glass. When the glow detached from the horizon completely, my chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a band around it. I had the sudden, strong feeling of being observed. Not watched in a creepy way, more like noticed, the way you notice an insect on a window before deciding whether it matters. The glow reached a point directly above the hills and stopped. For maybe 2 seconds, it just hung there. Then it vanished again, leaving the sky unchanged, untouched. I didn't stay outside for sunrise that time. I went inside and locked the door, even though I hadn't felt afraid in any normal sense. More unsettled than scared, like something had broken a rule I didn't know existed. I started writing down the times, always between 4:46 and 4:48, never on the exact same minute, but close. I checked weather reports. No clouds, no storms, no temperature inversions, nothing unusual. On the sixth morning, I drove out toward the hills after it happened, pulling over on a dirt road where I'd have a clear view. The ground was still dark, frost crunching under my boots. I stared at the spot where the glow had been. Nothing lingered, no warmth, no smell. No sign at all. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the sky lighten naturally, feeling foolish and exposed. That night, I dreamed of standing in the yard again, only the glow didn't lift. It stretched instead, thinning until it was a long, narrow strip of light that cut straight up into the sky, disappearing beyond where I could see. I woke up with my heart racing and the sensation that the room was too small. The glow didn't come back after that week. I still wake up early sometimes, especially when I can't sleep. I sit on the steps and watch the horizon, half hoping, half dreading that pale light will return. It hasn't. But every once in a while, when the sky is perfectly clear and the air is cold and still, I get the sense that dawn is about to break too early again. And for a second, before anything actually happens, the darkness feels thinner, like it's waiting to be pulled away. I noticed it because the woods went quiet. Not suddenly, like a switch flipping, but gradually enough that my brain registered something was off before I consciously understood what. I was about 10 minutes into my usual walk, the one I took most nights after work, looping through the edge of the neighborhood where the houses thinned out and the trees started crowding the road. It was late, close to midnight. The air was cool, but not cold, that early fall temperature where you don't need a jacket if you keep moving. The sky was clear, no clouds, just stars above the dark line of trees. I walked this route a lot. I knew the sounds, crickets, distant traffic, the hum from the highway miles away. That night, the crickets were still there at first, but they faded as I moved farther from the streetlights. One by one, like someone slowly turning down a volume knob. I stopped walking. The quiet didn't snap back. It stayed thick and pressed in like the air before a storm, except there wasn't a cloud in the sky. That was when I saw the light. It was above the tree line to my left, just barely visible. Not bright, not blinking. A dull, steady glow, like a star that had dropped too low and gotten caught in the branches. It hovered there, unmoving. I stood still, staring at it. I waited for it to blink like a plane or drift like a satellite. It didn't. I took a step forward. The light moved too, not away, sideways. It slid along the tree line, keeping the same distance from me, same height, same faint glow. I stopped again. It stopped. My stomach tightened. I laughed quietly, more out of reflex than humor, and shook my head. I told myself it was perspective, maybe a distant tower light lined up just right. Maybe my angle changed. I started walking again, faster this time. The light kept pace. I glanced down at my phone to check the time. 12:03 a.m. No notifications. No weird compass behavior. When I looked back up, the light was still there, still tracking me. I veered off the path and stepped onto the gravel shoulder of the road, testing it. The light shifted with me, adjusting its position smoothly, like it was locked onto an invisible rail. My breathing got shallow. I could hear my footsteps louder than they should have been, each crunch of gravel echoing too much in the quiet. I broke into a jog. The light matched me perfectly. It didn't bob, it didn't lag, it didn't surge ahead. It just slid through the air above the trees, pacing me like it had all the time in the world. I stopped again, hands on my knees, heart pounding. The light stopped. I tilted my head back, squinting, trying to see any shape around it. There was nothing, no outline, no structure, just a glow, steady and patient. I felt watched, not in a dramatic way, not like something was about to jump out. More like the feeling you get when someone stands too close behind you in a line, quiet and unmoving, close enough that you're aware of their presence without seeing them. I backed up a few steps. The light slid backward too. I turned around slowly, scanning the other side of the road, half expecting to see something there as well. Nothing. Just empty darkness and the faint outline of houses farther back. When I turned back, the light hadn't moved. It was still waiting. I pulled my phone out again, hands shaking now, and opened the camera. I didn't even try to zoom. I just pointed it at the trees and hit record. The screen showed darkness, grainy leaves, no light. I lowered the phone and looked with my eyes. The glow was there, clear as ever. A pressure built in my ears, subtle but uncomfortable, like the start of altitude sickness. The quiet deepened. Even my footsteps sounded muted when I shifted my weight. I made a decision then. I didn't think it through. I just turned around and started walking back toward home, fast but not running. The light followed. Same distance, same height, same steady pace. I passed the bend in the road where the trees thinned slightly. Normally from there you could see the glow of the neighborhood streetlights ahead. That night, they seemed dimmer, like someone had turned them down. I sped up, so did the light. Not ahead of me, not behind me, always beside me. I started to run. My breath came hard and loud in my ears, my legs burned, the familiar landmarks blurred past, mailboxes, driveways, the old oak with the split trunk. The light didn't change at all. It didn't chase me. It didn't close in. It just stayed exactly where it had been from the start. When I reached the first streetlight at the edge of the neighborhood, the light above the trees flickered. Just once. Then it vanished. Not faded. Not darted away. Just gone, like someone had turned it off. The crickets came back all at once, loud enough to make me flinch. The pressure in my ears released, leaving behind a faint ringing. I stopped under the streetlight, bent over, gasping for air. My whole body shook, partly from exertion, partly from adrenaline. I checked my phone again. 12:27 a.m. I stared at the time, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't been out there that long. I knew my route. Even with the stops, it shouldn't have taken more than 15 minutes. I walked the rest of the way home without looking at the trees. Inside, everything felt normal. Too normal. The hum of the refrigerator, the clock on the microwave blinking the wrong time because I'd never bothered to set it, my shoes by the door. I locked the door. Then I checked it again. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I told myself it was stress. I'd been working late all week. My sleep schedule was off. The brain does weird things when it's tired. That night, I didn't go for a walk. The night after that, I did. I told myself if I didn't, I'd never know whether it was real or not. I took the same route, same time, same pace. Nothing happened. No quiet, no light, just a normal night. I walked again the next night, and the one after that. A week passed. I started to relax. Then, one night, as I rounded the bend where the trees thickened, I saw it again. Same glow, same height, same distance. Waiting. I stopped immediately. It stopped. We stayed like that for a long time, me standing in the middle of the road, it hovering above the tree line. I didn't run this time. I didn't pull out my phone. I just stood there, breathing, trying to slow my heart. After maybe a minute, the light began to drift. Not away. Up. It rose straight into the sky, slow and smooth, until it blended with the stars and disappeared among them. The crickets never stopped that time. I walked home carefully, scanning the sky the whole way. It's been months since then. I still take walks, but I changed my route. I stick to well-lit streets now. I don't go near the trees after midnight. Sometimes, though, when I'm out late and the sky is clear, I get the feeling I'm being matched again. Not followed exactly, just paced. Like something out there learned my speed once and never forgot it. When that happens, I don't look toward the tree line. I just keep walking and wait until the streetlights come back. The power went out while I was rinsing a plate at the kitchen sink. Everything shut off at once. Lights, fridge, the low hum of the dishwasher I'd forgotten to start. The house dropped into that sudden hollow quiet that only happens when electricity cuts. Outside, the streetlights went dark too, one after another, like someone flipping switches down the block. I stood there with my hands still wet. listening. No thunder, no wind. The weather had been calm all evening, warm for early fall. I waited for the usual sounds to come back, a neighbor's generator, a car alarm, someone yelling, but nothing happened. I dried my hands on my shirt and walked to the front window. The neighborhood looked wrong without light. Houses blended into each other, dark shapes stacked along the street. The sky was clear, stars faint but visible. No moon. I could see all the way down the block, farther than usual, because there was nothing glowing to break it up. I figured it was just a grid issue. It happened once or twice a year. I stepped onto the porch to check if anyone else was outside. That's when the light appeared. It started at the far end of the street, low and narrow, like a flashlight beam stretched too thin. It slid slowly across the rooftops, not sweeping wide like someone scanning, but moving in a straight, deliberate line. The light itself was pale, almost colorless. Not white exactly, more like a washed-out gray. It didn't flicker. It didn't illuminate anything the way light normally does. Roof shingles didn't brighten. Windows didn't reflect it. The light just existed on top of things, like a projection that forgot how shadows worked. I froze halfway down the porch steps. The beam moved house to house, passing over chimneys, antenna, tree branches. When it crossed leaves, they didn't glow or cast shadows. They just stayed dark, like the light wasn't really touching them. I remember thinking, very calmly, that this wasn't a spotlight. Helicopters used spotlights sometimes, especially near the highway a few miles east, but those were loud and harsh and bright enough to hurt your eyes. This thing made no sound at all. No rotors, no engine, no wind. The beam reached the house across the street and slid over the roofline. I waited for it to reach me. It didn't. It stopped short, hovering just before my side of the street. Hung there for a second, perfectly still. I could see the edges of it more clearly then, soft, slightly uneven, like fog being held in shape. My chest tightened. I became very aware of how exposed I was standing there, barefoot on my porch, the rest of the neighborhood dark and silent. Then the beam moved again. It lifted slightly and drifted sideways, cutting across the backyards behind the houses instead of the street. It passed over fences and sheds, moving at the same slow pace, like it was following something invisible. I turned my head to track it and noticed something else that made my stomach drop. No one else was reacting. No doors opening. No voices. No phones lighting up. It was like the entire neighborhood was empty, except for me. The light continued its path, reaching the tree line behind the houses. As it crossed the taller trees, I expected it to scatter or break up. It didn't. It stayed intact, gliding over the canopy, still not casting shadows, still silent. I stepped off the porch without realizing it, standing on the sidewalk. That was when the sound disappeared. I hadn't noticed it until it was gone, but the usual night noises, insects, distant traffic, the faint hiss of wind, all cut out at once. The silence felt thick, like pressure in my ears. The beam paused again, just above the trees. I felt an urge to wave, to shout, to do something that would prove I was real and awake. I didn't. I stood there with my hands curled into fists, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The beam slid upward and thinned, fading as it rose until it was gone entirely. The moment it vanished, sound rushed back. Crickets started up all at once, loud and uneven. Somewhere a dog barked. I heard a car engine turn over a few streets away. I realized I was breathing fast and forced myself to slow down. I went back inside and locked the door, even though I knew that was pointless. I stood in the dark living room, listening, half expecting the light to reappear through the windows. It didn't. About 10 minutes later, the power came back on. Lights flicked on throughout the house. The fridge hummed. The street lights outside glowed to life like nothing had happened. I stood there until my eyes adjusted, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of darkness and nerves. The next morning, I walked down the block and asked my neighbor Tom if he'd noticed the outage. He said, yeah. His power went out for a bit. Asked if mine was back on too. I asked if he'd been outside. He said no. He'd been watching TV when it shut off and just waited it out. I asked if he'd seen anything strange. Lights. Movement. Anything. He shook his head and laughed. Said I watched too much late-night stuff. Over the next few days, I paid attention to small things. How the shadows fell in my yard. How quiet it got at night. I checked the news, neighborhood forums, utility reports. The outage was logged as temporary fault. No details. I didn't mention the being to anyone else. A week later, I was out back taking the trash to the alley just after sunset when I noticed the roof lines again. I stood there longer than I needed to, watching the dark settle. Nothing happened. But now, whenever the power flickers, even for a second, I feel that same pressure in my ears, and I always look at the rooftops first, waiting to see if the light comes back to finish whatever it was doing. The captain's voice came over the intercom while I was stirring powdered creamer into my coffee. Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting a brief patch of turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. That alone wasn't strange. What caught my attention was the tone. He didn't sound rushed or alarmed. He sounded confused, like he was reading something that didn't match what he was seeing. I glanced out the window. We were cruising above a solid layer of white cloud, smooth as a tabletop. The sky above us was clear, deep blue. No bumps, no wing flecks, nothing that suggested turbulence was coming. The seatbelt sign dinged on anyway. A few people around me muttered and complied. I snapped my belt, took another look outside, and waited for the usual shudder. It never came. Instead, the plane went quiet in a way that made my ears pop. Not pressure change exactly, just a sudden dullness, like someone had turned down the ambient noise. The engine still roared, but the sound felt distant, muffled. Then the vibration started. Not shaking, more like a low-frequency hum you felt through the seat and your legs. It reminded me of driving over a bridge with evenly spaced seams, except we weren't moving up and down. It was constant. People noticed. A guy across the aisle leaned into the aisle and looked around. A woman behind me asked her partner if he felt that too. Someone laughed nervously. The captain didn't say anything else. The vibration grew stronger for a few seconds, then leveled off. My coffee sloshed slightly but didn't spill. The plane stayed perfectly level, no turbulence in the way anyone understood it. I checked my watch out of habit. It was a cheap analog thing I wore for work. The second hand was moving normally. I remember that clearly because I stared at it, counting beats, trying to ground myself. Then it stopped. Not slowed, not skipped, it just froze mid-tick. I tapped the glass with my fingernail. Nothing. At the same moment, the vibration stopped. The engine noise snapped back to normal. The cabin lighting felt brighter, like my eyes had been adjusting to something dimmer without me realizing it. A few seconds later, the seatbelt sign turned off. The captain came back on. Thanks for your patience, folks. Looks like we're back to smooth air. That was it. No apology. No explanation. People started talking at once. Nervous laughter. Someone clapped sarcastically. Flight attendants unbuckled and went back to the galley like nothing had happened. I looked at my watch again. The second hand was moving. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. My watch was 2 minutes behind. At first, I blamed the watch. Cheap battery, bad timing. I reset it and tried to forget about it. But then the guy across the aisle leaned over. "Hey," he said, holding up his wrist. "Did your watch stop just now?" I felt my stomach tighten. "Yeah, 2 minutes, right?" He nodded slowly. "Exactly 2. A woman a few rows up turned around. "Mine too," she said. "I thought it was just broken." Someone else chimed in from farther back, then another. By the time the flight attendant came through with drinks, at least 6 of us had realized the same thing. Every watch had stopped for exactly 2 minutes. Not phones. Phones showed no gap, only watches. Digital and analog both. The flight attendant laughed it off when we asked. "Probably just a coincidence," she said. We didn't feel anything unusual up front. But her smile looked forced, and she avoided eye contact when she moved on. The rest of the flight was uneventful. Clear skies, smooth ride, normal landing. At the gate, people talked about it in hushed voices, like they didn't want to sound crazy in front of strangers. A few joked about time warps. Most shrugged it off. I tried to do the same. A week later, I was on another flight, different airline, different route. Early morning, foggy departure that cleared once we climbed. About an hour in, the captain announced unexpected turbulence again. Clear skies again. This time, I paid close attention. The same dulling of sound, the same low vibration, the same sense that the cabin was sealed inside something else for a moment. I didn't look at my watch until it was over. 2 minutes behind. I didn't talk to anyone this time. I just sat there, heart pounding, pretending to read. After that, it started happening more often. Not every flight, but often enough that I noticed patterns. Always during cruise, always clear air, always announced as turbulence that never actually shook the plane, always 2 minutes. On one flight, I felt bold enough to mention it to a flight attendant I knew from previous trips. Her name was Lauren. She'd been flying for over a decade. She listened carefully, then said, "We don't see anything on our instruments when that happens." "When what happens?" I asked. She hesitated. "Sometimes there's a discrepancy. Clocks don't line up. It's rare." "How rare?" She shook her head. I shouldn't have said anything. The last time it happened was over the ocean. Red-eye flight. Most people asleep. Cabin lights dimmed. The vibration felt stronger that time. Not louder, deeper, like it was coming from below the floor. I closed my eyes without meaning to. When I opened them, the plane felt empty. Not literally empty. Everyone was still there. But there was a sense of space that shouldn't exist inside a metal tube full of people. Like the cabin was bigger than it should be. The vibration stopped. I checked my watch. Stopped. 2 minutes later, it resumed. When we landed, my watch was exactly 2 minutes behind local time. I don't fly as much anymore. When I do, I leave the watch at home. But sometimes, mid-flight, I still feel that low hum in my chest, faint and familiar. When that happens, I keep my eyes open and count silently, waiting for something I don't fully understand to finish passing through us. I noticed it when I leaned forward to kill the engine. I'd pulled into the overlook just before sunset, the kind that's nothing more than a widened shoulder with a metal guardrail and a small sign telling you the elevation. It sat above a winding stretch of road that cut through low mountains, the view opening up toward a valley full of trees and scattered lights from a town miles away. I stopped there, sometimes on my drive home from late shifts, mostly just to sit for a minute before going back to my apartment. I reached toward the dashboard, and that's when I saw it in the driver's side window. My reflection moved a fraction of a second after I did. It wasn't dramatic. If I hadn't been staring right at it, I might have missed it. My hand moved forward, and my reflection followed just slightly late, like a bad video stream buffering for a split second. I froze, hand hovering. The reflection froze too. In sync again. I straightened slowly, heart picking up. The reflection straightened with me, perfectly matched. I tilted my head to the left, then the right. No delay. "Okay," I muttered, feeling stupid. Probably just tired. I'd been working doubles all week. I stepped out of the car and shut the door, the window going dark. Cold air hit my face, sharper than I expected for early fall. The sky was clear but already dimming, the sun low enough that everything had that stretched, flattened look. I walked to the guardrail and leaned against it, staring out over the valley. Cars moved far below like slow insects, their headlights just starting to pop on. A few birds cut across the sky, heading somewhere with purpose. After a minute, my heart rate settled. I went back to the car, meaning to grab my phone. That was when it happened again. I reached for the door handle, and in the reflection, my arm lagged. This time, it was more obvious. My hand closed around the handle, and my reflection's fingers didn't curl until a beat later. It wasn't a blur. It was a clean delay, like the reflection was watching me and copying what I did instead of mirroring it. I pulled my hand back fast. The reflection followed a moment later. I stepped away from the car entirely, breath shallow. The reflection did the same, but late. I felt a wave of dizziness, the kind that makes the world feel unreal for a second. I pressed my palms together, grounding myself, and watched the reflection do it just after I had. I wasn't panicking yet, but I was close. "Get it together," I said out loud. My reflection's mouth moved after the sound left my lips. I couldn't hear it, obviously, but seeing the delay made my stomach drop. I backed away until I was out of the reflection entirely, standing near the guardrail again. My hands were shaking now. I shoved them into my jacket pockets and stared hard at the horizon instead of the car. That's when I noticed the light. At first, it looked like a star that had come out early. A single white point low in the sky, just above the far ridge line. Too bright for an airplane, too steady to be anything obvious. I squinted, trying to focus on it. The air felt strangely still. The wind had paused. The light drifted sideways. Not fast, not slow, just smooth, perfectly level, without blinking. I forgot about the reflection for a moment, all my attention locked on that point of light. It didn't leave a trail. It didn't change brightness. It just moved, stopped, then moved again. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me flinch hard enough that my shoulder hit the guardrail with a dull clang. I pulled the phone out, half expecting some kind of alert. No notification, just the screen lighting up. When I looked back at the sky, the light was still there, hovering. I glanced at the car window again without really thinking about it. My reflection was back in sync. I lifted my hand slightly. The reflection lifted it at the same time. No delay. I felt a tight, cold knot settle in my chest. I looked back at the light. It was dimmer now, like it was being turned down rather than moving farther away. The edges softened until it was hard to tell where it ended and the sky began. Then it vanished. Not shot away, not blinked out, just gone. The moment it disappeared, the wind came back. A faint breeze rustled the trees below, and I realized how quiet it had been before. The normal sounds of the world rushed in all at once, too loud for a second before settling. I stood there longer than I meant to, replaying everything in my head, trying to find a way to make it normal. Eventually, I got back in the car and drove home. I kept my eyes on the road the whole way, afraid to look at my reflection in the side mirrors. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The next night, I stopped at the same overlook. I told myself it was because it was on the way and I liked the view. That wasn't true. I wanted to see if it would happen again. I parked in the same spot and sat in the car for a full minute before moving, watching my reflection carefully. Everything lined up. No delay. I exhaled slowly and opened the door. Outside, the air felt heavier than the night before. Low clouds moved overhead, catching the city glow and smearing it across the sky. I leaned against the car, arms crossed, watching the valley. Nothing happened. After a few minutes, I started to relax, embarrassed at myself for expecting something. I turned toward the car to leave. My reflection didn't turn with me. It stayed facing the valley for a fraction of a second before following. My pulse jumped into my throat. I moved my arm experimentally. The reflection lagged again, clean and unmistakable. I couldn't look away this time. Fear pinned me in place, but curiosity was worse. In the reflection, my eyes didn't feel like mine. They weren't doing anything different exactly. They just felt focused, like they were paying attention to something I wasn't. I swallowed hard and forced myself to look back at the sky. The light was there again. Same spot as before, same color, same impossible steadiness. The delay in the reflection seemed to stretch as the light brightened slightly. When I lifted my hand, it took almost a full second for the reflection to catch up. I had the sudden, overwhelming sense that the reflection wasn't lagging behind me. I was lagging behind it. The thought hit me so hard my knees felt weak. I grabbed the car door to steady myself, cold metal biting into my palm. The light drifted upward this time, slowly rising until it was just below the cloud cover. The air pressure shifted again, my ears popping sharply. My reflection raised its hand before I did, just barely. A twitch of fingers, then my own hand moved without me consciously deciding to. I yanked my arm back, gasping. The light dimmed. The reflection snapped back into perfect sync. I didn't wait. I got in the car, slammed the door, and started the engine with shaking hands. The headlights cut across the empty overlook, and everything looked painfully normal. I drove home too fast, glancing at my reflection in the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting it to move on its own. It didn't. I didn't stop at the overlook for weeks after that, but I started noticing smaller things. My reflection in store windows hesitating when I turned too quickly. My bathroom mirror feeling just a beat off when I brushed teeth late at night. Never as obvious as at the overlook. Just enough to make me question myself. I avoided mirrors when I could. One evening, I was washing my hands at work when a coworker named Jenna asked if I was okay. She said I'd been staring at myself like I didn't recognize who I was looking at. I laughed it off. I stopped driving that route home altogether and took a longer way through town. I told myself distance would help. It did for a while. Months later, I found myself back on that road by accident after a detour. Without thinking, I pulled into the overlook again. Old habits die hard. The place looked exactly the same. Same guardrail, same sign, same view. I sat in the car and stared at my reflection. Perfect sync. I stepped out, heart racing. Nothing happened. I stood there until the sky darkened fully, watching for the light. It never appeared. When I turned back toward the car, my reflection moved with me, exactly as it should. I don't know why that unsettled me more than the delays. I left quickly and haven't been back since. Sometimes, late at night, I catch my reflection in a dark window and feel a brief, awful pause before it moves. It always corrects itself immediately. But I don't look at the sky anymore when that happens. I don't want to know what has to fade for things to line up again. I woke up already holding my breath. I didn't open my eyes at first. I just lay there, completely still, with that tight, electric feeling in my chest that only comes from being absolutely sure you're not alone. Not scared in a vague way. Certain. Someone had been standing near my bed. I could feel where they'd been. On the right side, close enough that if I'd reached out, my hand would have hit something solid. The air there felt wrong, like it hadn't settled yet. Warmer, maybe, or just disturbed. I listened. No footsteps, no breathing, no floorboards creaking in the hallway. The house was silent in the normal nighttime way, refrigerator humming faintly, the soft tick of the wall clock in the living room. That made it worse. Slowly, I opened my eyes. The room looked normal. Same shadows on the walls, same dim glow from the streetlight leaking through the blinds. My dresser, my closet door, half open like I always left it. No one there. I exhaled, but it came out shaky. My heart was still racing, like it hadn't gotten the message yet. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. It wasn't there. That sent a fresh spike of panic through me. I sat up too fast and scanned the bed, the floor, the nightstand. Then I saw it. My phone was in my hand. Not just in my hand, I was holding it upright, arm raised slightly like I'd been aiming it. The screen was on. The camera app was open, and it was pointed straight at the ceiling. I stared at it, confused enough that my fear stalled out for a second. The camera preview showed the familiar patch of ceiling above my bed, a hairline crack near the corner, nothing else. No flash, no recording indicator, just the live camera view. I checked the time, 3:08 a.m. My last clear memory before waking up was putting my phone on the nightstand around midnight and rolling over to sleep. I never slept with it in my hand. Ever. I lowered the phone slowly and looked at the ceiling with my own eyes. Nothing. I switched the camera to video and checked the gallery. No new videos, no photos, nothing recorded since earlier that evening. I sat there for a long time, trying to replay the moment of waking up, trying to remember if I'd heard anything or felt something specific. All I could remember was that certainty, that someone had been there, close enough to matter. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I told myself it had been a stress dream. I'd been working late all week, not eating great, too much screen time, the usual list of things you blame when your brain does something unsettling. I went about my day mostly fine, but I kept catching myself glancing at my phone, half expecting it to be open to the camera again. That night, I put it face down on the nightstand before bed. I even slid it a little farther away than usual. I woke up at 3:08 a.m. This time, I knew exactly why. The room felt crowded, not visually, spatially, like the air had been pushed inward, compressed. My ears felt full, the way they do before pressure changes on a plane. I opened my eyes immediately. Still nothing there. My phone was in my hand again. Camera app open. Pointed at the ceiling. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might throw up. I sat up, scrambling back against the headboard, almost dropping the phone in the process. I checked the screen more carefully this time. The ceiling in the preview didn't look exactly like the ceiling above me. It was the same crack, same angle, but the lighting was off, just slightly. The shadows were softer, like the light source wasn't coming from the street lamp anymore. I looked up again with my own eyes. The real ceiling looked sharper, higher contrast, like two versions of the same image, out of sync. I lowered the phone. The preview adjusted instantly to match reality. I stared at the screen, then slowly raised it again. For half a second, just a half, the camera lagged. The image on the phone showed the ceiling as it had been a moment earlier. Then it caught up. I don't know how long I sat there testing it, lifting and lowering my arm, watching that tiny delay. It wasn't dramatic. It was barely perceptible. But once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. Eventually, the pressure in the room eased. The air felt normal again. My ears popped slightly. I checked the time. 3:11 a.m. 3 minutes gone. I called in sick to work the next day. I didn't trust myself to focus. I spent most of the morning searching my phone settings, battery usage, permissions. Nothing unusual. No new apps, no background camera activity. That night, I didn't sleep in my bedroom. I dragged a blanket to the couch and left all the lights on. I told myself it was temporary, just until I felt normal again. I woke up at 3:08 a.m. anyway. This time I was on my side, facing the back of the couch. My phone was wedged between the cushions, screen glowing faintly. Camera app open, pointed upward, at nothing. I started to cry then, quietly into my sleeve because I didn't know what else to do. The house felt too big, too hollow, like sound would travel too far if I made any. Over the next week, it kept happening, not every night, but often enough that I started dreading going to sleep. Always around the same time, always the same feeling that someone had been close, watching, not touching. Sometimes the phone would be angled differently, toward the corner of the ceiling, toward the top of a doorway, once toward the hallway, never toward my face. I tried turning the phone off completely. I tried leaving it in another room. I tried powering it down and locking it in my car. When I left it in the car, I woke up with my hand raised anyway. Empty, still positioned like I'd been holding something. The next morning, my phone was back on the nightstand, turned on, camera app open, pointed up. That was when I noticed something else. My battery history showed activity during the night, small spikes. Camera usage for a few minutes at a time, always ending around 3:11 a.m. I asked my friend Elena if she'd ever sleepwalked with her phone. She laughed and said no, then paused and asked why. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to sound half normal. She suggested a carbon monoxide detector. I bought one that afternoon. It never went off. A few nights later, I woke up to the familiar pressure and decided not to move. I kept my eyes closed. I didn't reach for the phone. I just listened. The room wasn't silent this time. There was a faint sound, so low I felt it more than heard it. A soft, rhythmic pulse, like a distant engine idling somewhere underground. The pressure deepened. I became aware of a presence again. Not a shape, not a figure, just a sense of proximity, like someone standing too close behind you in line. My phone shifted in my hand. I hadn't realized I was holding it. I felt my arm lift slightly, guided, careful, like whoever was doing it didn't want to wake me fully. The sound intensified for a moment, then stopped. The pressure vanished. The room snapped back to normal. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. I opened my eyes. The phone was aimed at the ceiling. Camera app open. I checked the time. 3:11 a.m. I don't sleep with my phone in the room anymore. I don't sleep much at all, honestly. Sometimes when I'm lying there awake, staring at the ceiling, I get the sense that whatever was there before hasn't gone away, that it's just learned it doesn't need the camera anymore, because it already knows exactly where I am. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of mint tea, watching the last scraps of twilight fade over the hills west of the house. It was early September, one of those evenings in rural Vermont where the heat from the day finally gives up and the woods start cooling fast. The crickets were loud, the air smelled like cut grass, and the sky still held a faint band of blue before it dropped into full darkness. My house sits on a slope above the road, facing a rolling hill that's half forest and half old pasture. I'd lived there 3 years by then, long enough to know every usual sound: trucks shifting on the downhill, foxes screeching in the woods, the neighbors' wind chimes. It was a quiet night. Too quiet, maybe, but I didn't think anything of it. I had just leaned back in the rocker and pulled a blanket across my legs when I saw the first sign of it, a faint white glow appearing behind the crest of the hill. At first I thought it was the moon, except the moon wasn't supposed to rise on that side, and this glow was small, tight, not spreading. It looked like a single point of light, too white to be headlights, too steady to be a house lamp. It was far away, maybe half a mile, and low to the ground. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. The glow brightened slightly, like something rising slowly up the ridge from the far side. I waited for the shape of a car to follow, or for the glow to break into familiar beams as it came over the hill. But the light stayed round, compact, and lifted higher, smoothly, like it was being pushed up through thick fog, even though the air was clear. That was what made me sit forward. The motion didn't feel mechanical. It didn't bounce like off-road headlights. It didn't wobble like a drone. It just rose, calm and weirdly confident. By the time it crested fully above the hill, the glow was about the size of a softball held at arm's length. A clean white, not glaring, with no halo around it. Just a sphere of light suspended about 10 or 15 feet above the ridge. I felt this strange urge to stand, like staying seated was the wrong thing to do. Not from fear, more like instinct telling me to shift into some kind of alertness. I set the tea down, pushed the blanket aside, and stood up. As soon as I did, the glow shifted. Not backing away, not darting off. It simply paused for half a second, like acknowledging the movement, before slipping straight down behind the ridge, disappearing in the same smooth, controlled motion it had come up with. Gone. No fade out, no flicker. Just gone. The tree line swallowed the darkness again, and the hill looked normal, just a quiet ridge at dusk with the first stars starting to appear overhead. I stayed on my feet a while, staring at the place where the light had peaked above the hill. My eyes kept scanning the edges of the trees, waiting for the glow to come up again. Nothing did. I checked the time on my phone. Only a few minutes had passed, but it felt longer, like something had stretched time in a subtle way I couldn't prove. When I sat back down, the crickets started up again, but softer. Sparse, like they were testing the air first. I tried to relax, but every few seconds I'd glance back at that ridge. The glow had been too deliberate, too smooth. Lights don't move like that unless someone or something is controlling them. I waited maybe 15 minutes before giving up and going inside to grab a jacket. When I stepped back out, the air felt colder than it should have, like the temperature had dropped faster on my property than anywhere else. I pulled the jacket tight and scanned the hill again. Then I noticed something new. The clouds overhead, thin, harmless streaks, were drifting normally east. But above the hill, directly where the light had appeared, the clouds changed speed, only in that one patch. They slowed visibly for a moment, like they passed through a layer of air that was thicker or warmer or something different. Then they sped up again, rejoining the normal flow. I'd never seen clouds behave like that. I walked down the steps into the yard, just far enough to get a clearer angle on the ridge. The grass was damp, the smell strong. Everything else felt too still. Even the road below was empty. "Hello?" I said into the dark without meaning to. My voice landed wrong, flat, swallowed fast like the sound didn't carry past a certain point. I shut my mouth and backed up the steps. Around 9:30, a car finally passed on the road, Jacob's old pickup, the engine rattling like always. I watched his taillights disappear. Just seeing another human that close made me feel more grounded, though I had nothing to say to him, even if he'd stopped. When the glow didn't return, I tried going inside to distract myself. Tried watching TV, tried sorting some mail, but my eyes kept drifting to the porch window. The ridge sat there in perfect silhouette, unmoving, but I couldn't shake the sense that I was supposed to watch it, like missing something would be worse than seeing it. Around 10:15, I stepped back outside. The temperature had dropped again, not dramatically, but enough that I could see my breath faintly. The sky was darker, with thicker clouds forming overhead. The crickets were almost silent now. I listened hard, hearing nothing but wind in the birch trees on the far end of the property. Then the glow appeared again. Not above the ridge this time, through it. A faint white radiance bled upward between two tall pines, as if the source of the light was below the crest, but brighter than before. The glow rose slowly, slicing a thin shape between the tree trunks. But instead of lifting all the way into view, it stopped halfway, hesitated, and slipped back down. My heartbeat thudded painfully in my ears. I stepped backward toward the house. One foot hit the porch step. I didn't take my eyes off the ridge. The glow came up a second time. Slower, more deliberate, and again, it paused just before revealing itself. This time it hovered for several seconds. Not visible directly, only as a pale outline against the trees, but I could feel its presence. Not physically, but in that strange way you sense someone's attention before they speak. Like the air was leaning toward me. I raised a hand slightly, as if shielding my eyes from something brighter. The glow slipped back down one last time and didn't reappear. I stood there waiting long after it faded. My legs grew stiff, my hands numb. The ridge looked normal. The clouds resumed their usual drifting. Eventually the crickets started chirping again, evenly this time. I went inside, but didn't lock the door right away. My mind kept replaying the exact motion of that glow, how it rose, paused, and retreated with such controlled smoothness, like it wasn't moving randomly but reacting somehow. Before going to bed, I checked the hill through the upstairs window. Nothing. The ridge looked empty, just dark trees against darker sky. But when I finally pulled the curtains closed, I hesitated. For a second, less than that, I thought I saw a faint white reflection move across the glass. Too quick to be from a car, too high to be from anything in the yard. I stood there, hand on the curtain, staring at nothing. My chest tightened until I remembered to breathe. I never saw the glow again after that night. But every time I sit on the porch now, especially near dusk, my eyes always drift first to that ridge, waiting for a small, deliberate light to lift into view, hover long enough for me to rise to my feet, and then slip silently back down behind the hill as if it had been watching me watch it. I was taking out the trash a little after 11 p.m., later than usual because I'd gotten sucked into a phone call with my sister. It was early October, that weird in-between weather where the air is cool, but still carries traces of summer warmth. My house sits near the edge of a small neighborhood in Ashford, Connecticut. Quiet, lots of trees, not much light pollution. On clear nights, you can see more stars than you'd expect for being only 20 minutes from a college town. The trash bins sit by the side gate near the maple trees, which always drop leaves earlier than everything else. The yard was scattered with them, the smell of damp leaves drifting around as I stepped outside. Nothing unusual. I wasn't thinking about anything except whether raccoons had gotten into the bags again. About halfway to the bins, something caught my eye above the roofline. A patch of sky looked wrong. Not darker or brighter, just slightly blurred, like heat distortion off asphalt in summer. Except it was a cool night, and the distortion was up among the stars, not near the ground. At first I thought maybe I'd smeared something on my glasses, so I took them off and wiped them on my shirt. The distortion was still there. A soft, wavering patch of air, vaguely oval-shaped, drifting across the stars at an even, slow pace. The stars behind it looked warped, stretched just slightly, as if seen through moving water. No light, no sound, no edges I could define. Just a shimmering patch that didn't belong. I stood there holding the trash bag, staring up like an idiot. It moved steadily from west to east, maybe the speed of a small plane if the plane were totally silent and barely visible. I waited for the silhouette of a jet or a blinking wing light to show itself, but nothing did. The distortion kept its shape, never revealing anything solid, just wavering, bending the background like something transparent passing overhead. The bag in my hand rustled suddenly, even though I wasn't moving. A small breeze brushed past me, but the trees didn't react. The leaves on the ground didn't shift. Only the bag did, as if the air right around me had changed pressure for a moment. I took a small step backward toward the porch. The distortion above paused. Not a full stop. It was more like the motion slowed to almost nothing. The stars continued drifting behind it normally, so I could tell the distortion itself had altered its movement. My stomach tightened. I waited to see if it would speed up or disappear. Instead, it rotated. Not physically. I don't know how to describe it, but the distortion twisted slightly, like whatever was causing it had changed orientation. More stars bent and rippled behind it. The patch grew a little more defined, the edges tightening as though it were concentrating or focusing. Then, just as I started to feel real fear, it resumed drifting eastward. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe normally until it was halfway past the tree line. The distortion grew fainter, stretching as it went, thinning until it looked like nothing more than warm air rising from the roof of a house in summer. It dissolved completely about 5 seconds later, vanishing into the star field. I let out a breath and tried to make sense of it. Maybe a temperature inversion? Maybe my eyes were tired? I had been staring at a screen for hours before going outside. But then I heard a noise behind me, a soft thump from the far side of the yard near the shed. The leaves rustled in a small circular patch, as if one spot of air was pressing down or swirling, the same way dust moves under a ceiling fan. But there was no wind, and the rest of the yard was perfectly still. I stared at that spot until the rustling stopped. Whatever caused it disappeared without a trace. I dropped the trash bag into the bin and backed toward the porch. The yard felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just empty in a way it normally didn't. Like something had passed through and the space it left behind hadn't settled yet. Inside, I turned off the porch light, thinking I'd try to see the sky more clearly through the sliding glass door. The distortion was gone, but the stars in the direction it had traveled looked off. Maybe I was imagining it, but they seemed brighter than the ones overhead. Sharper, as if the air there had been scrubbed clean. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. When I checked it, I saw a notification telling me the compass needed calibration. I hadn't used the compass in weeks. I opened it and watched the little calibration animation spin for longer than normal before it finally settled. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling and went back to my call with my sister. I didn't mention anything. It felt too weird, too flimsy to explain. Like saying it out loud would make it sound ridiculous. Eventually, I went to bed. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the faintest tapping noise on my window. Not loud, not aggressive, just a soft tick every few seconds, like something lightly brushing the glass. I sat up, heart jumping, listening hard. The tapping continued. Irregular, but real. I forced myself to get up and check. When I slid the curtain aside, I saw nothing outside except my own reflection and the dark yard. The porch light was off, but the stars were bright enough to give everything a faint outline. No animals, no branches hitting the house, just darkness and still air. Then I noticed something. The same patch of sky, now farther east, looked slightly blurred again. Faint, thinner than before, but visible. Like whatever it was hadn't left completely. A soft ripple passed across it. I blinked. The distortion vanished instantly. The tapping stopped at the same moment. I backed away from the window. The house felt too quiet, like the air itself was listening. I didn't sleep much after that, mostly lying awake and staring at the ceiling. The next morning, everything looked normal. Birds were loud again. The air was bright and warm. My yard was just my yard. But when I checked my phone before leaving for work, the compass asked for calibration again. And that night, when I took the trash out a second time just to test myself, I found myself staring up automatically, searching for that wavering, impossible patch. For a long moment, the sky looked perfectly normal. Then one single star in the east flickered. Not twinkled, but flickered, and slid sideways just an inch before settling back into place. It was so subtle I could have blamed my eyes. I didn't stay outside long enough to decide. I was somewhere between Wausian and Napoleon when the radio went dead. 1 second, it was some late-night call-in show out of Toledo, the host talking over a guy from Bowling Green about gas prices, and the next, it was just gone. No static, no fade-out. Just a flat, empty silence that didn't even sound like the normal quiet between stations. I glanced down at the display. The station number was still there, the volume bar still halfway up. I nudged the knob anyway. Nothing changed. Great, I muttered, more to fill the space than anything else. It was close to midnight. Late July. Northern Ohio. The kind of humid summer night where the air feels thick even with the windows up and the AC on low. I was on County Road 13, the back way to my parents' place, because I'd left my buddy Nate's house too late and wanted to avoid the highway patrol. The world outside the headlights was just corn and soybeans and the occasional dark shape of a barn. No towns for a few miles, no gas stations, no other cars either. The last pair of headlights I'd seen had been 10 minutes earlier, coming the opposite direction. I tapped the radio off and back on. Still nothing, not even static when I spun the dial. Instead, a faint tone began. It came in underneath the dead silence like somebody had slid a tiny tuning fork inside the speakers. One soft, pure note. Not high enough to be painful, not low enough to feel like a vibration. Just a thin, clean tone that pulsed in a slow rhythm. On, off, off. I checked the display again. No station name, just FM 97.3 frozen there. When I twisted the knob to change it, the numbers moved, but the tones stayed. Same volume, same pattern, completely unaffected. The hair on the back of my neck stirred. I told myself it was some weird capacitor issue or a loose wire screwing with the audio. I'd bought the car used. The stereo already had quirks. Still, the timing of it felt strange. The tone pulsed at almost exactly the same tempo as my heartbeat. I tested it, held my fingers to my wrist, counting silently. 1 pulse, 2, 3. The tone lined up for several beats, then drifted slightly, then lined up again. Not perfect, but close enough that I noticed. I turned the radio off entirely. The tone kept going. That's when my stomach finally flipped. The display went completely black, as if it had lost power, and the rest of the dash dimmed for half a second before returning to normal. Check engine lights stayed off, RPM steady, temperature fine. Everything looked normal except for the dark radio screen and that thin, rhythmic tone still coming from the speakers. I cracked the window to see if the sound was actually in my head. Warm, damp air pushed in, carrying the smell of manure and cut grass. Crickets droned faintly in the distance. No tone. When I rolled the window back up, I heard it again. Clear as before. On, off. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and focused on the road. The cornfields on either side loomed high, taller than the car, blocking out any view of farmhouses beyond them. Every so often, I'd pass a break in the rows where a dirt lane cut through. Each time, my headlights would briefly wash over a mailbox or a metal gate before the corn walls closed in again. A few minutes went by like that. Just the hum of the engine and that soft, unnatural beeping in my ears. Then the tone changed. It doubled in speed, still soft, but the pulses now closer together. My chest tightened. It felt like someone had turned a dial inside my head. At the exact same moment, the fields opened up. I came to a long stretch where the land dipped away from the road into a broad, flat expanse planted with soy. The plants were low enough that I could see all the way across the field to the tree line and the old power lines that marched along the horizon like sharp black stitches. And there, ahead and slightly to the right, hovering over the field, was a dull red light. I saw it first as a smudge above the soybeans, like the end of a cigarette held in the dark. Then, as I got closer and the angle changed, it sharpened into a solid shape. Not perfectly round, not a point like a star, but more like the fuzzy circle you see when you stare at an LED through frosted glass. It hung maybe 20 or 30 feet above the ground, motionless. No blinking, no strobing, no beam, just a steady, muted red that didn't spill onto anything below it. I eased off the gas without realizing it. My speed dropped from 55 to 40, then to 35. The car felt too fast no matter what I did. My focus tunneled onto that light. The tone in the speakers shifted again, lowering in pitch slightly, still rhythmic, still detached from anything I did. I reached for my phone in the cup holder. The screen refused to turn on. The haptic buzz came through under my thumb, but the display stayed black, like the backlight had died. No glow, no icons, nothing. I held the power button. Nothing changed. "Come on," I whispered. The red light grew larger in the windshield as I approached. It stayed the same color, the same intensity. Dirt lanes branched off on both sides, empty and dark. No parked trucks, no yard lights, no signs of a farmhouse connected to that field. When I drew nearly parallel with the light, I realized how wrong it was. There was no reflection. The soybeans underneath it were just dark shapes in the wash of my headlights. The light didn't touch them at all. It didn't touch the road either. It was as if the air around it was the only thing allowed to participate. My instincts started screaming at me, but my body lagged behind, caught between wanting to slow down and wanting to floor it. I ended up settling somewhere in the middle, creeping past at maybe 20 miles an hour, eyes locked on the side window now. The red light remained exactly where it was, perfectly still, hovering over the field about 50 yards out. The tone in the speakers grew more insistent, not louder, just more present, like it was pressing against the inside of my ears. On, off, on, off, on, off. I could hear my own breathing now over the sound of the tires on asphalt. It sounded too loud in the small car. For 1 second, everything lined up, the car moving slowly forward, the empty road, the shadowy field, and that unnatural flat red glow hanging in the middle of it all. Then it shot upward, no ramp up, no acceleration, just instantaneous motion like someone had cut a frame out of reality. One moment it was there over the field, the next it was a streak zipping straight into the sky. A vertical smear of red, thin and impossibly fast, disappearing into the low clouds without ever bending or curving. The clouds themselves lit faintly from within, where the streak vanished. The glow spread out in a soft circle, then shrank back to normal gray. The tone cut out mid-pulse. Silence slammed into the car. Real silence, with only the engine and the faint hiss of tires left. My ears rang with the absence of that sound. I realized my foot had lifted fully off the gas. The car was coasting. I forced myself to look away from the rearview mirror where I'd been expecting to still see some trace of red. There was nothing, just the empty road behind and the dark smear of field. I pressed the accelerator and watched the speedometer climb. 30, 40, 50. Off to my right, the brittle silhouettes of corn stalks rose again as the fields changed back from soy to tall crops. The tunnel closed in around me. For a few miles, I didn't dare glance at the sky. Eventually, curiosity or stupidity won out. I flicked my eyes upward through the windshield. The clouds looked ordinary. No glowing shapes. No strange holes. No streaks. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I grabbed it so fast, I almost dropped it. The screen lit up normally, full brightness, icons all where they should be. A flood of delayed notifications came in. Group chat, email, a weather alert about possible fog after midnight. I opened the compass app without really knowing why. The little arrow spun twice, then settled. North was north again. I turned the radio back on. It came to life at normal volume, the call-in host droning about city council drama like nothing had happened. I spun the dial. Every station I hit was exactly where it should be, with normal static between them. I kept going until I reached the highway. When I pulled into my parents' driveway half an hour later, the porch light was on and the house looked exactly as it had for the past 20 years. My mom's ceramic rooster still sat lopsided on the front step. The maple tree still leaned slightly over the garage. Nothing felt any different out there. The sky was just sky. Inside, my dad was half asleep in his recliner with some late-night news show murmuring in the background. He glanced at the clock and asked if the drive had been okay. I heard myself say, "Yeah, fine," like I'd rehearsed it. It wasn't until I was alone in the guest room that I checked the time on my phone again. 12:07 a.m. The dashboard clock in my car had said 11:58 when I pulled into the driveway. I know because I looked, surprised I made it before midnight. 9 minutes difference. My car clock had always been dead on. I checked it compulsively against my phone on longer drives. Maybe it had just drifted. Maybe I'd misread it. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of a passing train. Every time headlights swept the guest room curtains, my heart lurched, waiting to see a dull red instead of the normal white and yellow. Nothing strange happened the rest of the night. But a few weeks later, driving home along a different stretch of county road at dusk, the radio flickered. Just once. Just enough for one soft, familiar tone to slip through between songs. A single pulse, so faint I could almost pretend I'd imagined it. Then everything went back to normal, and the sky above the fields stayed empty. I was staying at my cousin Matt's coastal cabin in Oregon for a long weekend, something I'd been meaning to do since he bought the place the year before. It sat halfway up a bluff overlooking the ocean, not fancy, just an old cedar-sided place with a deck that faced the water. The beach below wasn't the kind you swim at, steep, rocky, dangerous in winter, but the view was unreal. That Friday night, I stayed up later than Matt, who went to bed around 10 because he had an early fishing trip planned. I wasn't tired, so I sat out on the deck with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, listening to the waves hit the rocks in this slow, heavy rhythm. The sky was clear, except for a few low clouds hugging the horizon. The moon was somewhere behind me, hidden by the bluff, so the ocean looked almost black. Every so often, the foam caught the faintest glint from a porch light down the coastline, but mostly it was just darkness and sound. I'd been out there maybe 40 minutes when I first noticed the light. It was far out. So far, I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Just a small, bright point hovering above the waterline. It reminded me of when fishing boats use those strong deck lights, the kind that reflect silver across the waves. But this one wasn't reflecting anything. The water beneath it stayed dark. I leaned forward, squinting. The light didn't move. It didn't bob or drift like a boat. It stayed perfectly still, maybe a few degrees above the horizon. After about 10 seconds, it pulsed. Not brighter, just fuller, like it expanded a little, then contracted again. I told myself it had to be a distant ship, maybe a research vessel, maybe a buoy with an unusually strong LED. Anything normal. But the more I watched it, the less it acted like anything I'd seen on that coastline. The light drifted slowly upward. Not like a flare. Flares arc and they fade and they wobble. This moved in a straight vertical line, smooth and deliberate. It rose maybe 20 or 30 feet before stopping again. The water below remained untouched. No shimmer, no reflection, no indication that anything bright existed in the sky above it. I stood up from the deck chair without meaning to. The air felt heavier. Not windy, not cold, just dense, like the atmosphere thickened a little around me. Even the waves sounded quieter for a moment. The light pulsed again, a few feet higher now. I reached back and slid the deck door open just a crack, ready to wake Matt if I needed to. But I couldn't make myself call out. The situation felt too vague, too unreal to speak out loud. Part of me was scared I'd break whatever fragile boundary existed between noticing something strange and acknowledging it. The light rose again, this time faster. Up into the thin layer of clouds that had been hanging above the horizon. The cloud lit faintly from within, a diffuse glow that lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then the brightness faded, swallowed by the cloud. No streak, no trail, no spark. Just gone. I waited for it to reappear on the other side of the cloud, the way a plane or helicopter would. Nothing emerged. The sky returned to its normal dark. I let out a shaky breath. I hadn't realized I'd been holding it. The ocean stayed loud for a while, steady and familiar, as if reclaiming the silence the light had taken from it. I stayed on the deck, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. My eyes kept catching imaginary glints, bits of moonlight or reflections on the sliding door. But nothing solid appeared. After a few minutes, I decided to go inside, figuring I'd spooked myself. But before I closed the sliding door, something else caught my attention. The waves near shore had changed, not in a huge way, no sudden swell, no crash out of rhythm, but the pattern felt off, too uniform. The breaks came at almost identical intervals, like they were being metronomed. I leaned out slightly and listened hard. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each wave sounded spaced almost exactly the same, like the ocean had fallen into a mechanical rhythm. I stepped back out onto the deck. The air pressure shifted again. Soft, like a faint pop inside my ears, the waves continued their pattern. 5, 6, 7. Then the 8th wave hit late, a little delayed, and when it did, the entire rhythm dissolved back into its usual uneven crashing. I stood still, waiting for anything else strange to happen. Nothing did. The air felt lighter again. I ducked inside and shut the door gently. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that bright dot rising silently into the clouds, leaving no trace. Around 5 in the morning, I heard Matt moving around in the kitchen. I joined him, bleary and unfocused. He asked if I was up early or hadn't slept. I said I didn't sleep well. He made a joke about the cabin mattress being older than he was. I almost told him what I'd seen. I opened my mouth twice to try, but the words felt wrong. Not embarrassing, exactly. Just fragile. Like saying it would make it false somehow. When he left for his fishing trip and the sun finally came up, I walked back out onto the deck. The ocean looked normal, gray-blue, restless, uncaring. No pattern to the waves beyond the usual scattered rhythm. No ship lights on the horizon, no signs of anything at all. But there was one thing I couldn't explain. On the wet railing of the deck, slightly glistening from the morning mist, was a faint ring of dryness. A perfect circle, maybe 3 inches wide, as if something warm had rested there long enough to evaporate the moisture in that exact shape. I touched it. The wood felt the same temperature as everything else. By the time Matt returned around noon, the circle had vanished into the general dampness of the day. I didn't mention it. I stayed one more night, but I couldn't relax on the deck again. Every time I glanced toward the horizon after sunset, I half expected the light to reappear. Hovering in that impossible stillness, ignoring the water beneath it, waiting just long enough to see if I'd react. It never came back. But sometimes when I drive home from work along the coastline, I catch myself checking the sky above the ocean, just in case something bright decides to rise where nothing should be rising at all. I noticed the thing right after I turned on to Ridgewood Loop, the part of Morning Run where the houses thin out and you can see a big stretch of sky over the elementary school. It was early, maybe 6:05 a.m., and cold enough that my breath looked like steam. The sky was this washed-out gray-blue, the kind you get on winter mornings in Oregon when the sun isn't up yet, but the clouds are already glowing. I was halfway through mile 2 when something bright caught my eye above the roofline of the school. At first, I thought it was Venus, but it was too bright and it moved. Not fast or anything, just drifting in a lazy diagonal, like a satellite or a high altitude balloon. I slowed my pace, then eventually stopped near the bike racks. I pulled my earbud out and just watched it for a minute. It didn't blink or pulse like a plane, and it didn't arc like something re-entering. Just a steady, white point gliding silently. A woman walking her dog came around the corner. She didn't look up, just tugged the leash and kept moving. I wanted to ask if she saw it too, but it felt weird to bother her at that hour. I kept watching. The dot drifted right, slowed, then stopped. I don't mean it slowed to a hover. I mean it stopped dead in the sky, like someone hit pause. I thought maybe it was an illusion, like maybe it just happened to align with something, but the clouds behind it kept moving, sliding past in slow streaks. My first stupid thought was that my eyes were shaking from running. I blinked hard a couple times. It didn't budge. A few seconds passed, maybe 10, maybe 15, and I felt this pressure in my ears. The same thing I get sometimes when I drive up the mountains too fast. Not painful, just wrong. I swallowed and popped them, but it didn't go away completely. The point of light stayed perfectly still. I pulled out my phone and tried to zoom in, but against the bright sky, it just looked like a little glowing pixel. I lowered the phone again and stared with my naked eyes, trying to make sense of it. Maybe a drone, I thought. But no drone I'd ever seen could hold position that high or that steady. And there was no sound, not even the faint buzzing a drone should make. A thin strip of cloud drifted toward it from the west. It was the kind of cloud that's almost transparent, just a long smear of white stretching across the sky. As it got closer, I caught myself holding my breath, waiting to see the dot either dip below it or blur through it. The cloud passed in front of the spot, and the spot vanished. Not dimmed, not blurred. Gone. The cloud slid away a few seconds later, and the sky behind it was empty. No bright point, no anything. I waited. 30 seconds, maybe. My fingers got cold around my phone. I scanned back and forth across the sky, trying to find it again, but there was nothing. I shoved my phone in my pocket and started running again, but it completely threw off my rhythm. My legs felt stiff, and every time the sky opened between houses, I found myself glancing up. I tried to brush it off. Weird atmospheric reflection. Satellite catching sunlight at a weird angle. Eye floaters. Whatever. I wasn't in the mood to start my day with something unexplainable. I reached the park at the edge of the neighborhood a few minutes later. Normally, I loop around the gravel trail twice before heading home, but as soon as I stepped under the trees lining the entrance, something felt duller. That's the only word I can think of. The air felt flat. The sound of my shoes on the path sounded muted, like someone laid a blanket over the ground. Even the distant highway noise seemed quieter. Halfway around the loop, I noticed a dog standing completely still on the far side of the field. No owner around. Medium-sized, light-colored, maybe a retriever mix. It wasn't staring at me, it was staring straight up. I followed its gaze. There was nothing there. The dog didn't move, not even its tail. I hesitated, wondering if I should go check on it, but something about the way it stood made me keep my distance. After maybe 10 seconds, it blinked a few times, looked around like it forgot what it was doing, then trotted toward the tree line and vanished between the trunks. That pressure in my ears came back again, stronger this time. I swallowed and rubbed the side of my head, waiting for it to fade. It didn't. Not completely. By the time I finished the loop, the sky looked normal. Gray, streaky, boring. I told myself the whole thing was probably just an airplane headed straight toward me before turning. But the way it froze, the complete stillness, didn't fit with that. I headed home along the same route. When I passed the elementary school again, I slowed down without meaning to. The sky above the roofline was empty. I stood there a moment, catching my breath, waiting for, a glint, a flicker, something. Instead, I heard something behind me, a soft crack, like someone stepping on a thin branch. I turned fast, half expecting to see the dog again. No one was there. Just the playground, the swings barely moving in a breeze I couldn't feel on my skin. I started running again. As I reached my street, the pressure in my ears finally faded. It didn't pop or release. It just slowly dissolved like it had never been there. Inside my house, everything looked normal. Coffee maker where I left it, running shoes on the mat, the faint hum of the fridge. I tried to shrug the whole thing off as I stretched, but my mind kept replaying that moment. The clouds slid over the light. Later that afternoon, when I went out to check the mail, I found myself scanning the sky again. Not because I expected the light to be there. Honestly, I hoped it wouldn't be. But because some part of me felt like it might show up anywhere, at any time. Completely silent and impossible. Nothing did. But every morning since, when I lace up my shoes and step outside, the first thing I do is look up and watch for anything that shouldn't be able to stop midair, and wait. I was sitting by Lake Brenton just after sunset, the kind of evening where the air hangs in place and everything feels a little muted. It had been a hot day and the ground was still giving off warmth, even though the sky had gone that deep blue-gray that comes right before full dark. I'd driven out there after work to clear my head, parked at the small public access area, and walked down to the shore with a folding chair and a cheap insulated bottle my sister gave me for my birthday. There wasn't anyone else around. It was a Tuesday, and most people didn't bother coming to that side of the lake anyway. The nicer trails and picnic areas were across the water, where the road was paved and the cell service didn't drop out. On my side, the trees grew tight. The dirt lot had potholes you could lose a tire in, and the lake smelled a little like algae. But it was quiet, and I liked that. I'd been sitting maybe 20 minutes, listening to insects, watching a few late kayakers paddle their way back toward the far dock. The sky was almost black now, except for a faint band of lighter blue on the horizon. I remember thinking the lake looked unusually still for summer. No breeze, no boat wakes, not even the occasional plunk of fish coming up for bugs. I was scrolling absent-mindedly on my phone when I heard the first sound. Not a splash. More like a soft, dull whump, almost like a hand slapping the surface from underneath. I looked up fast, expecting to see a fish jump or a turtle poke its head up. But the water was calm. Then a ripple formed about 30 feet out. Normally when something disturbs the lake, you get messy rings that spread unevenly. But this one was clean. A perfect circle, growing outward like someone dropped a stone dead center, but without the splash. The middle didn't bubble, didn't dip. It just pulsed slightly, then the ring widened. I stood up out of reflex. It was too perfect to be natural, too even. I took a few steps closer to the edge, trying to see if something was rising under the surface. But the lake was dark, almost mirror-like. Nothing moved below. The ripple expanded until it faded into the rest of the water. Then another one formed in the exact same spot. This one was slower, more deliberate. The center trembled just a tiny bit like the surface was vibrating. That's when the light appeared. It showed up above the lake, maybe 100 feet in the air, barely brighter than a dying ember. A dim red glow, round but not sharply outlined. It pulsed soft, slow beats, the way a distant radio tower sometimes looks through fog, except there wasn't any fog and there weren't any towers anywhere near Lake Brenton. I froze with one foot in the damp sand. The red light brightened slightly, then dimmed again. Each pulse lined up almost perfectly with the ring forming in the water. Light, ripple, light, ripple, like they were connected. I glanced behind me, half expecting to see headlights from a new arrival, or maybe a drone operator messing around. But the dirt lot was empty, except for my car, and the trees on either side stood thick and dark. I tried to listen for a hum. Drones have that high whine, but the only things I heard were the insects and a single bullfrog croaking somewhere farther down the shoreline. Another ripple formed, larger this time. The red light drifted slightly, maybe 5 or 6 feet to the right. Not fast, just a slow lateral slide. But the movement was too smooth to be a plane or helicopter, and it didn't have the green and white marker lights required for aircraft. I pulled my phone out and tried to record video, but the camera could barely pick up the glow. It looked like a faint red blur on the screen. The water didn't show up at all. While I fiddled with the phone, the sound around me changed. The insects didn't stop entirely, it wasn't that dramatic, but the noise flattened out, like they'd all backed off to a distance. Even the bullfrog sounded farther away than it had a minute earlier. Then the air pressure shifted, not enough to hurt, just enough that my ears felt too open, like the world got vacuumed out for half a second. The red light pulsed brighter once, and the ripple below it spread outward again, but this time the center did dip. Not much, maybe an inch or two, like something pressed down from above but didn't touch the surface. I stepped back, bumping into my folding chair. I wasn't scared yet, exactly, but I felt a kind of tightness in my chest I didn't have a name for. I aimed my flashlight at the water, thinking maybe the beam would reveal whatever was under there, but the moment the light hit the lake, the red glow flickered. Just a little. A stutter. The ripple froze mid-expansion. I lowered the flashlight and the ripple finished expanding normally. I tried it again. Light on, flicker. Ripple pause. Light off, pulse and ripple synced again. It was reacting to the beam. I felt stupid standing there doing experiments, but it gave me something to focus on besides the crawling feeling in my spine. The red light drifted closer to shore, maybe 10 feet. Then, another 10. It didn't tilt or wobble the way a drone would. It moved like it was suspended on a rail the rest of us couldn't see. When it got maybe 20 feet out from the shoreline, the water reacted before the light pulsed. The lake surface tightened, like a sheet being pulled taut, then released. That's when I finally got scared. I started packing up fast, grabbed my chair, my bottle, shoved everything under one arm. I kept my eyes on the glow and walked backward toward the trees. The light pulsed harder now, brighter. Still not enough to light up the lake or the trees. It seemed self-contained, but strong enough that it left a faint blot in my vision. The ripples kept coming in perfect circles, larger now. Too large to make sense, stretching almost all the way to the reeds. I reached the edge of the parking area and nearly tripped over a root. For a moment, the trees blocked part of my view, but I could still see the redness through gaps in the branches. Then the glow stopped pulsing. It held steady. The lake surface stopped moving. Completely. Not even the smallest lap of water touched the shore. The air got heavy again, that same pressure shift, like a thick blanket settling over everything. I heard something, not from the sky, but from the ground, a kind of low, buzzing throb under my feet. Not electricity, more like a distant engine running under the earth. I looked back toward the water. The red light began to rise, slow, steady, straight up. The ripples didn't return. Nothing disturbed the lake now. It was glossy and dark like oil. I watched the light climb until it was maybe 200 feet above the water. Then it dimmed a little, held position, and slid sideways across the sky with this soft sideways drift. No acceleration, no tilt, no arc. Just a perfect horizontal glide. I followed it with my eyes until it reached the part of the sky where the treetops meet the horizon. It pulsed once more, faint, barely visible. Then it winked out, not faded, not flew off, just gone. The lake stayed mirror still for almost a full minute before a breeze finally broke the surface, and everything around me snapped back into normal sound. Insects, the frog, distant traffic from the far shore. It was like somebody unmuted the world. I stood there clutching my chair until my hands hurt. Eventually I forced myself to walk to the car. My legs felt unsteady on the gravel, like I'd run a mile without stretching. Driving home, every time I passed an opening in the trees, I checked the sky for any hint of red. Nothing showed. When I got back to my apartment, I set the chair in the corner and noticed it was shaking a little because my hands were still trembling. I sat on the couch for a long time, staring at nothing, replaying the ripples, those perfect circles in my head. I went back to Lake Brenton the next afternoon after work, just to prove to myself it would look normal. It did. Kids were swimming, someone was grilling. Water lapped against the shore like regular water. Standing there in daylight, I almost convinced myself I'd overreacted. Almost. Then I walked to the exact spot I'd been sitting the night before and saw a faint mark on the shore, a curved line in the sand, almost like someone had drawn the edge of a circle with a stick, then half erased it. The lake moved normally around it. Wind, chop, nothing strange. But the line stayed there, untouched by the waves. I didn't sit down. I didn't unpack anything. I just backed away from the water and didn't return until weeks later, when the memory finally loosened its grip enough that the lake felt like a lake again. Even now, sometimes when I'm near still water, I catch myself watching for a perfect circle forming where nothing should be, and for that dim red glow waiting above it, pulsing like a quiet signal I don't want to understand. The fog was already thick when I turned onto Bayless Street, so dense it looked like it was pressing down on the rooftops instead of drifting. I'd been out later than I meant to. Dinner with a coworker ran long, and by the time I started walking home, the streetlights were just hazy orange smudges, barely lighting more than a few feet ahead. I don't usually walk that route. It's quieter, almost too quiet at night, with long lines of old bungalows and narrow yards. That night it felt even more closed in, like the fog was swallowing up sound as well as light. My footsteps felt muffled. Even the distant traffic on the main road sounded far away. I was halfway down the block when I saw the lights. At first it looked like a faint glow above one of the houses. Not a beam, not a spotlight, just a soft cluster of points barely visible through the fog. My brain tried to fit it into something normal. Christmas lights? Security floodlights? A drone? But the lights weren't stationary, they were moving. Not flying, exactly, more like drifting. A group of maybe 6 or 7 small, pale points gliding together in this slow, coordinated rhythm just above the roofline across the street. It reminded me of fish swimming in formation, changing direction with subtle shifts I didn't fully see. They weren't bright enough to cast light on anything, not even the fog around them. They were just there, suspended in that heavy gray air. I stopped walking without realizing it. The lights slid left, then curved upward slightly. They dipped again, sliding behind a tree's silhouette, then reappeared on the other side. I blinked hard, thinking I was seeing reflections from cars or street lamps, but there were no cars, and the nearest working lamp was behind me, barely hanging on through the fog. The cluster drifted closer, not toward me, but toward the center of the street, like it was inspecting the row of houses. The movement was too smooth for anything mechanical. No stutter, no wobble, no flicker, just controlled, silent motion. The hairs on my neck lifted. I took one small step backward. The lights paused. They didn't grow brighter, didn't act like they noticed me. But the pause itself felt wrong, like something had nudged a gear out of alignment. Then they shifted formation. The points drew closer together, almost touching, then spread out again in a pattern that didn't feel random. Not a shape I recognized, just something deliberate, coordinated. I whispered, "What the hell?" without meaning to. My voice sounded like it got swallowed by the fog the second it left my mouth. The lights began drifting in my direction, slowly. Not like they were honing in on me, but like they'd simply chosen a path that happened to lead down the street I was standing in. But with the fog low and the houses dark, there was nowhere I could go without crossing directly into their path. I stepped behind a parked sedan, crouching slightly. My heart hammered so hard I felt it in my jaw. I peeked over the roof of the car. The lights floated to the center of the street and hovered there, not fully stopping. Tiny adjustments kept happening, little slides and dips, but holding a general position. One of the lights drifted lower than the others, as if scanning the fog beneath it. Then it rose again and rejoined the group. The cluster tilted, changing orientation in a way that didn't match gravity or perspective. It wasn't rotating like an object. It was more like the entire formation had reframed itself in space, each point maintaining its relation to the others, while the whole thing angled smoothly. My breath turned shallow. I realized I was squeezing the edge of the car door so hard my knuckles hurt. A new sound entered the air. Not a hum, not a buzzing, but a faint pressure shift feeling in my ears, like when you drive through a long tunnel. It wasn't loud, but it felt physical, like the air density changed for a moment. The lights slowly rose higher, as if preparing to go above the fog layer. I watched, barely blinking. Then the fog thinned, just a small breath of wind, a slight parting, and for a second I saw the sky clearly above the cluster. Nothing was there. Not the lights, not a silhouette, not a craft, just empty air. The fog closed again almost immediately, and the lights reappeared. But farther down the street, as if the brief clarity had reset their position. They drifted quietly over the next block, moving with that same synchronized glide, then softened into the fog until I couldn't tell if they'd vanished or simply gotten too far away to see. The air pressure eased in my ears. The night noise returned faintly. A dog barked a few streets over. I stayed behind the parked car for at least another minute, waiting for any sign they might return. Nothing did. Slowly, I stood up and rubbed my hands together to get feeling back. Every house on the block looked normal. dim, quiet, fog-blurred. My own breath felt too loud. I walked the rest of the way home fast, checking behind me every few steps. The fog swallowed everything. I didn't see any more lights. Inside my apartment, I locked the door twice and stood at the window staring out at the street. Fog pressed against the glass, street lamp halos wobbling softly in it. Nothing unusual. But when the fog shifted, I kept expecting to see a cluster of pale points sliding through it, drifting low over the rooftops, moving with that too smooth rhythm. I didn't sleep much. In the morning, the fog was gone. The air was bright and ordinary. But later that afternoon, when I walked past the same block to prove to myself it had been nothing special, the quiet felt different. Like the street remembered something, even if I tried not to. Every now and then, when the weather turns damp and the fog creeps low, I catch myself watching the tops of houses for any sign of light moving in ways light shouldn't, always waiting to see if a cluster will drift into view again, synchronized like something alive behind the gray. I heard the chirping on a Thursday night, sometime after 9 p.m., while I was sitting on the back patio with a beer. It had been a long day, and the temperature had finally dropped enough that the air felt reasonable again. One of those warm Colorado summer nights where the breeze is barely there, just enough to move the wind chimes now and then. I usually sat outside for a bit before bed to decompress. That night felt normal at first. The sound came while I was halfway through my drink, soft, rhythmic, and too regular to be an insect. It wasn't a bird either. Birds don't chirp like that at night, and they definitely don't chirp in perfect pulses. It was faint, almost shy, but still distinct enough that I heard it over the hum of the swamp cooler through the screen door. Chirp, 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 about one per second. Clean, mechanical almost. I tilted my head a little, listening harder. It seemed to be coming from above, not from the yard, not the roof, higher than that. When I looked up, the sound stopped immediately, like someone hit pause. The sky was clear, typical dry summer night. Stars everywhere, the Milky Way a faint smear overhead. Nothing moved, no planes, no satellites, no clouds, just black sky and cold pinpoints of light. I waited a few seconds, still staring upward. Nothing. When I finally looked back down at my beer, the chirping returned, same rhythm. Same pitch, almost exactly where it had been before. I looked up again. It stopped. I tested it a few times, trying not to freak myself out. Look down, chirp. Look up, silence. Look down, chirp. Up, silence. It was too consistent to be a coincidence. Eventually, I kept my head angled downward, but shifted my eyes upward without moving too much. The chirping faltered, not a full stop, but a stutter, like it was reacting to my attention, even if I wasn't fully looking at it. When I lifted my chin by even an inch, the sound cut off. That was when my skin prickled. Not fear at first, just confusion that made me suddenly aware of how alone I was outside. I stood up slowly, trying not to crunch the gravel too loudly. I walked out into the middle of the yard where the patio light didn't reach as well. My eyes adjusted to the dark. The chirping didn't return yet. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then, chirp, chirp, chirp. I didn't look up this time. I kept my eyes level with the fence. The sound seemed to be coming from maybe 40 or 50 feet above me. Too high for a bug on the roof, too low for a plane, too steady for anything I could explain. It wasn't echoing off the houses. It didn't sound like something far away. It was overhead, directly. I took another step into the grass. The pulsing got slightly louder. Not by much, but enough that I could tell I'd moved closer to it. I finally whispered, "What is that?" Because hearing my own voice grounded me a little. The sound stopped again. Not faded. Stopped. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears then. The neighborhood around me was dead quiet. No dogs barking, no cars on the main road a block over, not even crickets. It was so still that it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. I backed up until I felt the patio concrete under my feet again. When I reached my chair, I sat down, gripping the armrests. Chirp. I jumped slightly at how sudden it was. Chirp, chirp. I stared straight ahead, letting my eyes relax, letting my peripheral vision widen. Sometimes you can catch movement that way better than looking straight at something. For a second, just a second, I thought I saw something darker than the sky shift above me. Not a shape, more like a patch where the stars didn't match up, like one or two of them were slightly displaced. I blinked hard. The patch was gone. The chirping continued. I tried to see if the sound had a direction. I rotated my head a little. It stayed above. I crouched down. It stayed above. I leaned back in my chair and stared at my knees. Louder. I exhaled shakily and put the beer on the ground. My hands were trembling now, and I didn't want to spill it. I forced myself to stand again and walk to the far end of the yard, near the fence. The chirping stayed with me, not directly overhead every step, but shifting just slightly to stay aligned above me. Like it was tracking me, not from a distance, but from a fixed height straight up. At one point, the chirping paused, and the silence got so deep it almost rang in my ears. Then a softer, lower pulse joined it, like a second voice humming from above, slower and stretched out. I looked up without thinking. Silence again. I couldn't see anything. My eyes darted from cluster to cluster of stars, searching for any sign, motion, shape, anything. Nothing. I backed away from the fence and started walking toward the house. I didn't run, but I didn't stroll either. The chirping picked up again when my gaze dropped. Shorter intervals now. Chirp, 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 chirp. It reminded me of sonar pings. When I reached the porch, I hesitated. The porch light created a cone of brightness that felt suddenly unsafe, like stepping into it would make me visible in a way I didn't want to be. But the dark yard felt worse. I stepped into the light anyway. The chirping slowed. I placed my hand on the doorknob. The chirping stopped. I waited. After 5 long seconds, a single chirp sounded. Loudest yet. Not painfully loud, but sharp. Intentional. I turned the knob quickly and slipped inside, shutting the door behind me. I locked it without thinking and stood in the entryway with the lights off, listening. Nothing. Not even the refrigerator hum. I cracked the blinds just a sliver and peeked outside. The yard looked normal again. Streetlight down the block flickered faintly like always. Nothing overhead. No movement. I watched for 2 full minutes, hardly breathing. Still nothing. When I finally flicked on a lamp, the normal house sounds returned. The fridge humming, the swamp cooler rumbling, the faint chirp of a smoke detector battery dying somewhere down the street. I sat on the couch and stayed there until almost midnight, too keyed up to move, staring at the back door as though it might open on its own. Eventually, exhaustion won. When I went to bed, I left the blinds closed and the lamp on low. Just before I drifted off, I heard one faint chirp from outside. Not overhead, off to the right, east of the house. Distant, almost shy. Like whatever it was had drifted away but hadn't gone far. I didn't get up. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, imagining the sky above the neighborhood and lay, wondering if something was passing over the houses the same way it had passed over mine. Pausing each time someone looked up, pulsing softly in the dark, continuing only when no one was paying direct attention. For days afterward, every time I sat outside, I caught myself listening hard for that pulsing sound. Some nights I heard normal noises, wind, insects, cars on the road. Other nights, the silence got thick again, too evenly quiet, and I'd go back inside after a few minutes, so the heart picking up speed. I haven't heard the chirping again the way I did that first night. Not clearly, not close, but every once in a while, right as I'm looking away from the stars, I think I hear the beginning of it, just one pulse. Before the night swallows it, like something paused again mid-motion, waiting for me to look up so it could disappear. I was camping alone near the Red River Gorge in Kentucky, a few miles off one of the less traveled trails. It was late October, that weird time when the air gets cold the moment the sun drops, even if the day was warm. I'd set up my small tent in a clearing just wide enough for it, with the tree line tightening around me on all sides. I'd been there once before with friends, but this was the first time I'd camped it solo. I'd already finished dinner, just a freeze-dried pasta bag and some instant coffee, and was sitting on a log by the fire. There wasn't much sound except the crackling and the occasional creak of branches shifting overhead. It wasn't windy, but every now and then you could hear the woods adjusting, like the cold made everything settle differently. I remember poking at the fire, trying to get the last bit of flame to catch on a stubborn piece of wood. That's when the ground trembled. It was one quick jolt, not enough to knock anything over, not even enough to be alarming on its own, just a single, soft, almost polite shake, like someone big had stepped on the earth nearby. The log under me vibrated. My mug rattled a little. Even the fire seemed to shift, as if something underneath had moved. I sat still for a second, listening. There wasn't any aftershock, no rumbling, just one gentle tremor and then nothing. I figured it must have been distant blasting or something. There were rock climbers, old quarries, random construction miles away. I tried to brush it off, but the woods went dead quiet afterward. I don't mean quieter. I mean everything stopped. No bugs, no faint rustling, no night birds. Just total air-sucking silence. Even the fire sounded muffled somehow. I remember holding my breath without meaning to. I stood up and looked around, half expecting to see an animal or something moving through the trees, but the tree line looked normal, just dark silhouettes against the sky. A few seconds passed, maybe 10. Then something above the clouds lit up. It wasn't lightning. I've camped through storms plenty of times. This was slower, like a glow being turned up behind a lampshade. The clouds overhead brightened with this dull metallic color, not white, not blue, not quite silver, just a weird industrial-looking glow. It pulsed once. Just one slow, deep pulse of light that filled the whole sky above me, almost like it was breathing. Then it faded back into the dark. I just stood there staring up, waiting for another flash or a sound. But there was nothing, not even a distant plane or a gust of wind. The woods stayed dead silent, like the whole place was holding its breath. After maybe 30 seconds, I heard the bugs again, starting all at once, like someone flipped a switch. The woods felt normal again. The fire crackled normally. My shoulders unknotted a bit, but the back of my neck didn't. That stayed tight. I tried to keep camping like nothing happened. I added a couple pieces of wood to the fire and pretended to focus on boiling water for some tea, but my ears were tuned to the sky in this wired, instinctive way. Every tiny sound made me look up. I kept checking the clouds through this small gap in the trees over my tent. I thought about texting my friend Kyle, but I had no cell signal at all, not even the one bar I'd had earlier in the evening. Eventually, around 10:30, I crawled into my tent. I wasn't really tired, but I wanted to be inside something with walls, even flimsy ones. I zipped the entrance shut and lay on my sleeping bag, listening. At first, it was normal. Crickets, a few distant owls, leaves settling. Then the silence came back, exactly like before. One moment the forest was alive, and the next, it was like someone muted everything. The absence of sound felt heavier than the presence of it. I sat up slowly. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I waited, but nothing else happened. No tremor, no glow, just silence thick enough to make you feel like you weren't alone. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped outside. The air was freezing now, but I barely noticed. I looked up through the same gap in the trees. Nothing, just dark clouds barely visible against the darker sky. I turned slowly, checking the tree line. My flashlight beam caught nothing but trunks and leaves. No movement, no shine, no eyes reflecting back. Then a faint breeze hit me. Just a small one, brushing the tops of the trees and stirring the leaves at my feet. The forest noises kicked back in a second later, sudden and full, like I'd stepped into a room where a conversation was already happening. I stayed outside for a long time after that, just listening and watching the sky. Nothing else happened, but my nerves stayed stretched tight. I finally crawled back into the tent and slept in short bursts, waking every time the woods went too quiet. When I packed up the next morning, I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before. Around the clearing, on the ground, the leaves, even a few logs, there was this very fine, pale dust. Not ash, not pollen, almost like metal shavings ground so small they looked like powder. It wasn't thick, but it was noticeable. It brushed off my boots in smooth streaks. Nothing above the clearing looked burned or damaged. The trees weren't marked, the ground wasn't scorched. It was just that faint dust, like it had drifted down overnight. I left earlier than I planned. On the hike back to my car, the normal forest sounds felt almost too normal, like they were compensating for the quiet from the night before. I didn't tell anyone about it for weeks. When I finally did mention the glowing sky to Kyle, he joked about satellites and weather balloons. I agreed with him out loud, because that was easier than describing how wrong the silence had felt, or how the light had pulsed like something alive behind the clouds. I've been back to Red River Gorge a few times since, but I won't camp alone there anymore. I stick to the popular sites where you can always hear at least one other person breathing or or moving around their tent. The woods are beautiful, but I don't trust the quiet there anymore. The blackout hit right after dinner. 1 second the lights were on, the next the entire block went dark. No flicker, no warning, just everything shutting off at once. I'd been sitting on my couch scrolling through my phone, but even that died a second later. Not powered down, just black screen like the battery had vanished. It was a hot August night, humid enough that the walls felt sticky, so staying inside without AC wasn't an option. I stepped out onto the porch to get some air. A few of my neighbors were already outside too, standing around looking confused. I remember seeing Mr. Alvarez from across the street lighting a candle on his steps while his wife kept tapping her phone like that would fix it. The whole neighborhood felt wrong without the usual hum of electricity. No porch lights, no TV noise bleeding through windows, no cars passing, just a heavy, unnatural quiet. Even the cicadas, which had been obnoxiously loud earlier, seemed to have gone silent. I walked down to the end of my driveway. The sky looked darker than usual, even for a blackout, like the air itself was absorbing light instead of letting the stars come through. It took my eyes a while to adjust before I could see anything beyond the silhouettes of the houses. I just started wondering if the outage covered more than our block when something flickered overhead. I didn't see it at first. I saw the reaction. Every car on the street, every single one gave a quick chirp. Not a blaring alarm, not the kind that flashes lights, just the soft single note they make when someone hits the lock button on a key fob. 16 cars, all chirping once in perfect sync. A couple people shouted in surprise. I froze where I was. Then I saw it. A faint green glow moving silently across the sky. Not bright, not dramatic. More like a soft smear of light drifting maybe 100 feet up. The shape wasn't clear. It didn't pulse, didn't flicker, just floated along at a steady pace. Enough to cast the faintest tint on the rooftops underneath it. It made no sound at all. I waited for someone else to react, but everyone nearby was staring at their cars, trying to figure out if it was some sort of electrical glitch. I don't think they even realized the glow was overhead yet. The thing kept moving down the street, and as it passed each parked car, the car chirped. Precise timing, one after another, like the sound was following it. When it reached the corner near the Simmons house, the last car gave its little beep, and then everything went quiet again. The glow kept drifting. It wasn't heading anywhere obvious. It didn't angle toward the mountains or toward town. It just followed the street like it was tracing the road itself. I stepped farther into the yard to keep it in view. When I moved under the open sky, the air felt different. Thinner somehow, like it pressed in on my ears. The glow slowed. For a moment it hovered directly above the cul-de-sac. Still no sound, not even the faint whir of wind. The color deepened slightly, not brighter, just richer, like the green had more weight to it. That was when my phone vibrated suddenly in my pocket. I grabbed it, thinking it had finally rebooted, but the screen was still black. The vibration wasn't a notification. It felt more like the phone itself shuddering. I looked around to see if anyone else reacted. Mrs. Alvarez had stepped into the street, staring up now, though I wasn't sure if she actually saw the glow or just sensed something above her. Her candle flame kept bending toward it, like a tiny flag in a steady breeze. Then the glow began to move again. Not forward this time. Down. Only a few feet, but enough that I felt my body tense, like it might drop onto the houses. It hovered there, just lower than before, until I noticed something strange. The shadows on the ground were bending toward it, even the faint ones cast by moonlight. They stretched just slightly, like gravity had shifted. The temperature dropped a few degrees. Not cold exactly, but sharp enough that my sweat cooled instantly. Someone shouted behind me, probably one of the teenagers a few houses down, but the sound cracked weirdly in the air. Not loud or echoing, more like the air swallowed most of it. The glow drifted sideways, no turning, no banking, just sliding smoothly, unnervingly, like something being pulled by invisible strings. It moved over the Simmons house, then over their backyard, then toward the small wooded patch behind the cul-de-sac. As it passed the last car on the street, that car chirped again, just once, like a final acknowledgement. And then it vanished behind the trees. Not faded, not dimmed, just gone between one blink and the next. The instant it disappeared, the cicadas started up again all at once, like someone hit play on a recording. The air felt normal again. The temperature bumped back up. Mrs. Alvarez's candle straightened. A second later, the power rushed back. Houses lighting up one by one, porch lights flaring, TVs humming to life. People started talking over each other. The teenagers ran into the street yelling about the car alarms. Mr. Alvarez announced that the outage had probably tripped something in all the remotes at once, which made no sense, but everyone nodded anyway. I didn't say anything. I walked back to my porch, sat down, and just listened, trying to convince myself it had been some weird electrical phenomenon, a transformer surge reflecting off clouds or something. Anything normal. Then my phone lit up on its own. The home screen appeared like nothing had happened, but the time jumped from 9:47 to 9:53 the instant it turned on. 6 minutes gone while the phone was dead in my pocket. I didn't mention that part to anyone either. A few nights later, I went outside again, just to breathe the air and see the sky after a long day. Everything was calm, quiet, normal. But when I stood near the street, my phone vibrated again. No notification, no call, just that same strange, empty buzz. I looked up without thinking, nothing there. No glow, no disturbance, just a clear night sky, but every car on the block chirped once. Soft, perfectly timed, one after another, following something I couldn't see. I was about 3 miles up the Pine Wash Trail when it happened. It was late afternoon in early October, the kind where the air in the Utah foothills cools fast once the sun dips. I'd taken the trail alone like I usually did after work, wanting to clear my head before going home. My name's Matt, and I've hiked that trail more times than I can count. Nothing unusual ever happens there. The trail loops around a low ridge before curling back toward the parking area. I was somewhere near that curve when I noticed something odd on the ground off to the right. At first, I thought it was just a spot where someone had set down gear or maybe where a deer had bedded down. But when I stepped closer, it didn't look like that. About 5 feet across, the leaves on the ground were pressed completely flat. Not crushed like someone had stepped on them, pressed. Smooth. Even, like a heavy plate had been set on them and then lifted. Every leaf pointed outward a little, like they'd been pushed from the center. I crouched down and ran my hand over them. They didn't spring back. They were cool, colder than the dirt around them. The air in that circle felt cooler too. I stood up and looked around for some explanation. No footprints, no animal tracks, no sign of a tent or anything like that. Just the trail behind me, the trail ahead, and pine trees shifting quietly in the breeze. I took a few steps back onto the trail, still staring at that ring. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the camera wouldn't focus. Everything in the frame looked smudged and smeared, like the lens was dirty. I wiped it on my shirt and tried again. Same thing. The center of the screen, the part where the flattened leaves were, just wouldn't focus. I gave up and pocketed the phone, feeling weirdly uneasy. I don't know why the focus thing got to me so much, but it did. I kept glancing back at the ring as I walked. 2 minutes later, something made me stop again. I didn't hear anything. It wasn't like the woods suddenly went silent or anything dramatic like that. It was more like a shift in pressure, like when you're in a plane and your ears are just about to pop, a subtle tightness in the air. I looked up. Directly overhead, the sky seemed wrong. There was a circular blur moving slowly across it, almost invisible if you weren't looking straight at it. It wasn't a cloud. It was too smooth, too perfectly shaped, and it slid across the blue without changing. Imagine smudging something on your phone screen and then moving the smudge around. That's what it looked like. I froze in the middle of the trail and watched it drift. It didn't go fast, just glided along, shifting the light slightly as it passed. Not enough to cast a shadow, but enough that the sky inside the circle looked a shade darker. My first thought was some kind of lens flare in my eyes, or maybe a migraine spot, except it didn't react when I blinked or moved my head. It moved on its own, heading toward the ridge. The air grew colder. Not freezing, just noticeably cooler than it should have been. I rubbed my arms and took a step backward without meaning to. As the distortion drifted farther, I heard a rustle behind me. I whipped around, expecting a deer or maybe another hiker. But nobody was there, just trees. The sound had come from the left side of the trail, maybe 10 feet away, right around the level where the trunk started to thin out. I stared at that spot for a long time, waiting for something to move, but nothing did. When I turned back, the distortion in the sky was almost at the top of the ridge. It hovered for a moment, just stopped completely, and the air pressure feeling got slightly stronger. Not painful, just unnerving. Then the thing faded, not like it flew off, like it dissolved. 1 second it was there, the next the sky was normal again. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My heart was pounding. I felt stupid because I couldn't explain why I was so rattled. Nothing had touched me, nothing had made a sound. But the hair on my arm stayed standing up. I decided to keep moving, partly because standing still made me feel exposed. I listened hard as I walked, expecting to hear movement in the woods. Every time a twig snapped under my own boots, I flinched. After maybe half a mile, I reached the part of the trail where the trees open up to a small overlook. It's just a rocky shelf where you can see the highway in the distance. I stopped there, trying to shake the unease. The view looked normal. Cars, sunlight, distant traffic noise, all fine. But then something faint brushed my ears. Not exactly a sound, more like a hum too low to hear, but still noticeable. It made my teeth feel weird, like they were vibrating lightly. I turned in a slow circle, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It didn't feel like it came from any direction, just the air itself. I crouched and pressed my fingertips to the ground. It wasn't vibrating, it was just in the air. Right then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I jumped. When I pulled it out, the screen flashed on, then off, then on again, but no notification popped up. The battery percentage dropped from 40% to 12% in a second. I stood there staring at that number, feeling this cold pull in my stomach. Before I could react, the hum stopped completely. The phone stabilized at 12%. The air warmed slightly. The normal forest sounds came back in gradually. The wind, the bugs, the distant highway. Everything felt like it had snapped back into place. I headed back down the trail fast, faster than I usually walk. The whole hike back, I kept checking the sky. It looked fine, but my eyes kept catching little flickers in my peripheral vision. I told myself it was just nerves. When I finally reached the parking lot, it was empty, except for my car and an older Subaru belonging to a guy I sometimes see on the trail. His name's Greg. He came out of the woods a minute after I arrived, waving like he always does. "Do you see that weird ring up there earlier?" he asked as he reached his car. My throat went dry. "What ring?" He pointed vaguely toward the ridge. "Up in the sky. Thought it was just my eyes being stupid, like heat waves, but not." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, probably too slowly. Greg shrugged it off, told me to have a good night, and drove away. I sat in my car without starting it, gripping the steering wheel. It wasn't just me. Someone else saw something, but the ring of pressed leaves that I didn't mention. No point. When I finally started the engine, the radio came on, even though I turned it off earlier. It was tuned to static. Not loud, but a soft hiss. I hit the power button and it didn't respond. After about 10 seconds, the static faded on its own and the radio shut off. The rest of the drive home was quiet. Too quiet. I kept watching the sky through my windshield, half expecting that circular blur to reappear. It didn't. I haven't gone back to Pine Wash since. I keep telling myself I will, that it's just a trail and nothing happened that actually harmed me. But every time I think about rounding that curve again and seeing that perfect ring on the ground, the back of my neck gets tight. And sometimes when I'm outside at dusk, I swear I see a brief smudge drift across the sky. Not always. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to make me look up and hold still until I'm sure the sky looks normal again. I was halfway through telling Naomi about the weird customer from earlier when the wind just stopped. Not slowed, not softened. It cut out like a switch had been flicked somewhere above us. We were walking along the old coastal path that wrapped around the cliffs near Sandmere Point. The kind of place locals swore they loved, but rarely actually used. It was late afternoon, the sky heavy with gray clouds that kept threatening rain but never committing. The ocean below was restless, dull steel blue, waves smacking the rocks in slow, tired rhythms. I noticed the silence first, then the way my hair fell flat against my neck. Naomi stopped too, squinting up. "That feels weird," she said. I looked overhead. The clouds were still moving, sliding west like normal weather, thick and layered, but the air around us stayed dead. The grass stopped bending, the faint salt smell just hung there. No breeze at all. Naomi laughed it off. "Storm's playing games," she said, and kept walking. I followed, but something about it stuck to me. The way everything else kept going, but the wind. Like the space around us wasn't paying attention. A few steps later, the distant waves sounded muffled, like someone threw a heavy blanket over the shoreline. Our footsteps on the gravel path felt louder than they should have been. We kept talking, but it felt forced now. Naomi's voice echoed slightly, even though there was nothing around to bounce the sound back. Halfway down the path, the air grew warmer, not humid, just wrong, like standing too close to someone else's breath. "Do you feel that?" I asked. She nodded, rubbing her arms. "Yeah, I hate this place sometimes." Ahead of us, near the point where the trail narrowed, I noticed the fog rolling in faster than before. Not from the water, but along the cliffs themselves. Thick, pale mist curling over the rock ledge like smoke slipping downward. But even that fog wasn't moving the air. When we reached the narrowing, Naomi slowed. "Let's just turn around. This is creeping me out." That's when everything went quiet. Not just the ocean, not just the wind, no birds, no distant traffic, no waves. Just this hollow silence that felt like standing inside a sealed box. I looked around, heart thudding slow and heavy. Above us, the clouds kept drifting, but directly overhead, there was a break forming, a wide oval stretch where the gray thinned out. The edges of it looked smoother than natural. Naomi noticed it too. "Is that normal?" We stood there, shoulders tense, both staring up. In the center of that thinning patch, the light shifted, just slightly. A pale, muted brightness growing through, not sunlight, not moonlight. It didn't cast shadows, it just made the sky look thinner. Then the humming started. Low, steady, barely audible at first, like a distant power line, but there were no towers nearby. It vibrated faintly through my chest, not loud enough to hurt, just enough to register. Naomi swallowed. "Do you hear that?" I didn't answer. I only nodded. The light above pulsed once, soft and hazy, like a slow inhale. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out automatically, but the screen showed no signal, no clock, no anything. Just black. "That doesn't make sense," I muttered. Naomi stepped closer to me, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. "We should go." But neither of us moved. The humming deepened, not louder, just heavier, like it pressed down on everything. My ears felt full, like altitude sickness creeping in. The clouds outside that oval continued their normal drift, but the ones forming the shape held perfectly still, like frozen cotton pulled tight over invisible structure. Then something darker slid behind it. Not a shape with edges, just a deeper shadow, passing under the thin light as though something massive drifted across the underside of the clouds. Naomi whispered, "What is that?" I didn't know. I still don't. It moved slowly, deliberate, as if gliding, and as it passed overhead, the air pressure shifted. I felt it in my jaw, my sinuses, like standing near a large truck, but without noise or wind. My heartbeat felt too loud in my own ears. The humming paused. Absolute silence again. Then a sharper vibration rippled through the ground beneath us, subtle but real. Gravel shifted under our shoes. I finally tore my gaze downward, just out of instinct, and noticed the tall grass to the side was standing perfectly upright, not swaying, not reacting, like it was pinned in place. When I looked back up, the pale light had dimmed slightly, but the darker mass was still there, stretching long, shapeless, slow. Naomi squeezed my arm hard, nails digging through my sleeves. "That we need to leave. Now." I nodded, but my legs hesitated, like my body didn't believe what my brain was screaming. The humming returned, softer, almost gentle, and the light began to thin, pulling inward toward the center of that oval space. The shadow shifted once more, like it rotated, and then it faded, not moving away, just dissolving until the cloud cover thickened again. The wind snapped back on. Sudden and sharp, grass bent, fog scattered. Waves grew louder all at once. We both gasped, like underwater swimmers breaking the surface. "What the hell was that?" Naomi breathed. "I don't know," I said, voice shaking, even if I tried to steady it. We didn't walk. We half-jogged back down the path, not looking up again, boots crunching too loudly against the gravel as if to reinforce reality. By the time we reached the parking area, the air felt normal again, cold and coastal and damp. The clouds rolled overhead like any other ugly pre-storm sky. Cars passed on the nearby road. A gull cried somewhere out beyond the cliffs. Everything normal, too normal. Naomi stood by her car, rubbing her face like she could wipe the moment away. You felt that, right? The air just stopping? Yeah. And the sound? Yeah. She let out a dry laugh that didn't match her eyes. Good, at least I'm not losing it alone. We didn't hang around, just awkward goodbyes, quick glances back at the sky, and then we drove separate ways. The whole ride home, I kept checking my mirrors and windows, expecting that strange stillness to return. But the breeze kept brushing the roadside trees. Everything moved like it was supposed to. When I got home, my phone suddenly reconnected like nothing ever happened. Messages rolled in from earlier, missed notifications, normal life piling back up. But later, that night, as I stood at my kitchen window, I noticed the clouds drifting slow across the moon again. And for just a second, right where the sky had thinned above the cliff path, one small patch moved differently. Too smooth, too deliberate. The air inside my house stayed perfectly still. A soft mechanical hum filled the night for several seconds. When it stopped, the silence felt unnaturally deep. I was sitting on the back steps of my cousin's coastal cabin in Port Ainslie, trying to cool off after a long day of hauling firewood and fixing a busted fence panel. The air was damp and warm, one of those sticky late summer evenings where the ocean breeze barely did anything. It was just past 10, and the sky was a dull purple fading into black. No stars yet, just low clouds drifting in from the water. My name is Lila Monroe. I'd driven out to stay a few nights alone while my cousin Trevor was away for work. He always said the place was quiet and peaceful, but that hum didn't feel peaceful at all. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, steady, almost clean, like the sound of something running smoothly on its own terms. I leaned forward, trying to identify where it was coming from. The small gravel drive beside the cabin was empty, just my dusty Subaru and a couple old kayaks stacked against the shed. The trees stood still. No breeze, no rustling. The waves rolled gently in the distance. When the hum cut off, the silence pressed in hard. Too hard, like the world had paused to listen. I stayed seated, heart starting to go faster, waiting for it to return. It didn't. Instead, the distant ocean sounded weirdly faint, like someone had turned the volume down. I stood up and walked a few steps onto the sand, barefoot, letting the coolness ground me. The clouds above drifted slowly, but even their movement felt muted. I swear the night air felt thicker around my shoulders. A faint glow shimmered to the left, near the edge of the shore. Not bright, just a soft haze, almost like moonlight catching on mist, except the moon wasn't even out yet. I squinted at it. The glow slid sideways along the waterline, smooth and level, then blinked out. Okay, I said quietly, more to hear my own voice than anything else. I walked closer to the shoreline, wet sand squishing under my feet. Every few steps, I glanced back at the cabin, its porch light steady and normal. No flickering, no weirdness, just a plain yellow bulb over a screen door. The hum returned, shorter this time, vibrating faintly through my chest. I could feel it more than hear it, like when a truck passes too close, except nothing was moving. My shoulders tensed. I turned slowly in a full circle. Still nothing. Then the hum vanished again, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like even the insects had stopped. I didn't like that at all. A few seconds later, a thin reflection slid across the surface of the water, as if something unseen just below it had moved. There wasn't a splash, no ripples, just a subtle shift in how the light looked. I backed up a step. Another faint reflection passed closer to shore, then faded as if it had dipped beneath the surface. The water looked calm again, but I felt watched in a way that didn't match the empty beach around me. I started walking back toward the steps, keeping my eyes on the shoreline the whole time. The sand felt colder now, and the air carried a strange heaviness. Halfway back, the hum returned, longer and steadier. It almost felt like it was above me now. I tilted my head up. The clouds glowed faintly in one spot, directly overhead, a soft, milky patch where everything else remained dark. The glow was stable, not flashing, not pulsing, just hanging there, quiet and wrong. My heart thudded in my ears. I stood frozen, staring up. The glow shifted slightly to the east, smooth and controlled, and the hum shifted with it, like they were tied together. A few seconds passed, then maybe 10. I lost track. The glow slowly dimmed until the clouds looked normal again. The hum faded right along with it. The silence afterward hit even harder than before. My ears felt like they were underwater. I forced myself to move, walking faster now, climbing the steps to the porch. The wooden boards creaked under my weight, a familiar sound that suddenly felt comforting. Inside, the cabin air was cooler, carrying the faint smell of salt and pine cleaner. I closed the sliding door and locked it, my hands shaking more than I wanted to admit. For a minute, nothing happened. Then the hum came back, softer, almost distant, like it was farther away now. I pressed my forehead lightly against the glass, trying to see through the reflection into the night. Outside, the sand looked the same. The trees stood still, the shoreline glimmered faintly. A soft band of light slid across the water again, slower this time. It arced slightly, then straightened as if adjusting its path. Still no splash, no sound. Every nerve in my body tightened. The light drifted farther out, then stopped completely. Just hung there, faint but distinct, hovering maybe a few feet above the surface. The hum decreased until it was barely noticeable,